Hey everyone. Hello, hello. That was my polite way of saying shh. Welcome to techUK, everyone. I'm Ben. I work for techUK, along with Ellie, who's down on the front row. I guess in this sense, I am Ellie and I are hosting today, so thanks for coming into our offices, but we're also delegates as well, so this in part came about because of our personal interest in type 1 diabetes. I've got the exciting job of going through things like fire escapes and things like that this morning. So if the fire alarm goes off, there are no drills. So if you follow Ellie and myself, the fire escape's just to the side of the lifts in a calm and orderly manner. And don't panic, usual stuff. Hopefully you've all found the coffee machines, which are dotted around where you'll see all the companies that have kindly sponsored today. That sponsorship means that you get a nice free lunch when lunchtime comes along. And we've also raised a bit of money for TDFC. For those that were here last year, that's an initiative that encourages adults and children to do a number of things through sport, football, with type 1 diabetes. Other than that, I think it's just left to me to say a big thanks to both Partha and Tim, who are standing up at the front. Give us a wave, guys. As co-organisers for this. Without them, it wouldn't be possible to put this on. A lot of work's gone into it. I think it's probably fair to say that Tim's taken on the bulk of that this year, so a big thank you for that. Beyond that, my last plug, Ellie came to this conference 2 years ago and left not long afterwards with a job at techUK. Ellie's just been promoted, so a big round of applause for Ellie. That's not embarrassing in the slightest. Which means her job's up for grabs again, so come and see us if you're interested in coming and working here. It's a great place to work. That's all of my plugs over, and I'll pass over to Partha, who probably needs no introduction, so I won't give him one. Partha, thank you.
Okay, good morning, and there's no slides or anything, but I'm going to keep it very short and sharp, simply because I think this is an event that we created 3 years ago, and since then it's spread out to different places. We had an event in Scotland, we're having one in Belfast later on this year, and I encourage anybody to do anything you need to do with these sort of events. It's not sort of copyrighted to anybody, it's just a concept, and I think you should spread it out, so to speak. The reason we set up this event 3 years ago was very simple, is that if you look at what's happening around the world and from a policy point of view, I think type 1 diabetes care has had a lot of focus. We're trying to drive things, whether you call it the Libra, we've got CGM in pregnancy, but we do also appreciate that the future of type 1 diabetes, apart from the promised 10-year cure, is going to be looping. Okay, it's going to be closed loops. That's the technology way, and there are many, many players in the market. There are people who are doing it themselves, and I'll mention about it in a minute. But I think you've got industry coming out with different options, and I think we'll, through the course of the day, talk about them. The question, and I always say one thing, the reason people have gone down the DIY route, and that's not a criticism of anybody in industry, but it's because people just want to look after themselves better, and they're just trying to find a way. That's as simply as I can see it. There's nothing complicated about it. And I think it's done its primary purpose. It's pushed industry into looking at where they sit, and it's made them think that looping is the way. It's probably fast-tracked technology, I think I would say 5-10 years by what it's done. So many kudos to the people who have done it over the years, and I think it's a fantastic example of innovation, patient-driven changes, which is only to be encouraged. Our challenge in the NHS will be not necessarily the people doing the looping, it will actually be the professionals, about how we do get them on board, how we are still talking about professionals, not about not giving access necessarily to the pumps and the right kit. And the question is, we need to get past that culture. So for a lot of people, looping will be like a quantum leap, right? So we need to get that up to scratch. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, but a lot of things are moving in the right direction, which is very good. And I love these sort of events simply because it gives us an opportunity, and I'll be very honest, this is how I do my clinical work. I don't have type 1 diabetes, okay? I have no idea what it is to live with type 1 diabetes. Anybody who tells you is a healthcare professional, they know Mostly they're lying or they lack insight. I don't have it. I don't know what it is. I've never pricked my finger, never had a hypo. Done. Okay. So I always look on these events, whether it's this one, whether it's great to sort of get the feedback for us. These are the events where you go like, actually, it's an important issue enough that we need to take it in policy and do something about it. So thank you very much for everybody who comes along. And I was going to say my thank you to Ellie and Ben for all the help, but specifically to Tim. Tim's been a driver. I've got Alistair in the audience somewhere. There you go, at the back. They've been absolutely drivers to try and make Kev's in the room somewhere here as well. But it's fantastic what you guys have done. 3-4 years ago when we got Dana here to come down, Dana Lewis, who was one of the pioneers. And I think what these guys have done, taking in different areas, encouraging healthcare professionals to join hands, it's fantastic. And I can only have good words and kind words for that. So my job here is just to be on the sideline. This is an event for you guys, an event for you day. My job is to talk to industry, which will be quite interesting when we have that session. But otherwise, enjoy your day, learn from each other. And my last bit would be try and spread it out to somebody else. If you think it works for you, take it to somebody else. As they say, pass it on. So that's got to be the culture in which we work. So I'll take questions at some point, but otherwise, let the day begin. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Partha. So just before we get completely underway, this is the agenda for the day. This morning we have a number of sessions in the main room looking at some of the highlights from the conference that was running last week in Madrid, how you might get started with Type 1 tech, and especially if you're looking towards DIY. As Partha mentioned, the industry session looking at what is industry doing and the panel discussion. We'll then take lunch, and after lunch, Sufyan's going to come in and talk about Type 1 tech and DIY from a clinical perspective and his lessons from the real world. Then this afternoon, we have a series of workshops for people to get together, talk about stuff, learn a bit more about various different topics. And on that point, because we have 2 separate workshop streams, we want to just get an idea of how many people will want to go to which sessions. So Ellie is going to take a note of people as we go through and ask people to put their hands up and tell us roughly which session they want to go to. So for the first sessions after Sufyan's spoken, the first session is getting started with Type 1 tech, where to go and what to look at. Who is interested in that as the topic? Okay. Bringing tech up in a clinic appointment, tips, tricks and confidence boosters. Who's up for that one? Okay. And then DIY systems, what you need to know about CGM and APS. How many people on that one? Well, that seems to be the majority. Then in the second session, we've already seen your hands up for DIY, what you need to know about CGM and APS. Getting the best out of commercial solutions. Okay, that's a decent number. And then getting the best out of DIY systems. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Ellie will be allocating rooms and we'll be telling you where to go when we put the slides up after lunch for that.
For the top one,
yeah.
What's the difference between the 3? So if you're thinking about going on the system, they both look like...
Sorry, yeah. So one is about access and one is about DIY tools themselves. So the first session is about where do you get DIY, where do you get tech from? So not just the DIY systems, it's things like how do you get yourself onto a pump, how do you go about getting CGM, things like that. Whereas the last one is about what are the DIY systems that are available, how would you get going with those, what's the interaction with that kind of stuff. So they're slightly different perspectives. Okay. So the first session, as we mentioned, is about what we've seen at Advanced Technologies and Treatments for Diabetes, the conference that runs annually in various countries around Europe. The whole point of this conference is to get together a lot of healthcare professionals, industry, people with diabetes, and people who are forward-thinking and want to see improvements in diabetes care. I was a picture I was going to put up of me sitting in one of the sessions with Partha's session about social media and the artificial pancreas session, and I was watching one on the phone whilst I was watching the other one in the auditorium because it was that busy with stuff going on, but I thought that was probably a bit of overkill. But we're going to cover a few themes in this session. So the rise of automated insulin delivery systems, much similar to what this session's about. One size doesn't fit all. Making MDI smarter, because technology is not just about automated systems. Longer wearing cannulas for pump users. That might not sound like a very big thing, but I think most pump users in the room would probably say, oh, okay. Psychological care, something that had a very prominent part to play, and beyond insulin. So, rise of AID systems. You'll have seen most of these people represented here during the course of the day. Unfortunately, the little picture is covering the CAM APS FX image in the corner. Diaboloop, Dexcom, Tandem with Control IQ, Medtronic, who everybody's heard about, Omnipod's Horizon, Omnipod with Tidepool and other pump manufacturers, and CAM APS FX, all featured heavily at ATTD. The bottom row here are all things that are not yet approved. Some are closer to approval than others. The top row have all got CE marks and are available either in the UK or in Europe, and we're waiting for that rollout, or have regulatory approval somewhere. I'm not going to go into too much detail about each of these individual systems, as the people who are talking about industry will be here later on to do it, but it's fair to say they were all very heavily represented at ATTD. There were a lot of discussions around the clinical trials that took place in relation to getting these things approved. What's common across all of them is that the clinical trials seem to show that people's time in range kind of jumped from around 60-odd% to around 72 to 74%, time in range being the 3.9 to 10 millimole range that is being agreed as a consensus. And what was also interesting was that if you looked at the clinical trials, the average HbA1c of most of these, and when I say most of these, I mean this one, this one, this one, prior to going onto the trial, averaged around 7.4, 7.5. So in terms of the UK population, that's pretty low. We don't manage to get anything, well, we only managed to get 30% of our population below 7.5%. The only one that started with above 7.5% was CAM APS FX, which is Roman Havorkas from Cambridge, and that was 8.2%, so probably more realistically reflected the type of user who is going to benefit most from an automated insulin delivery system. So suffice to say, this was a key topic throughout the whole of the conference, with various different sessions talking about performance, about exercising with these systems, about future algorithms that are going to be used in these systems. But the other thing to come out of this, and that you can see from this slide, is that a lot of these systems seem to be integrated into a single device. And the FDA's approval process in the US no longer just looks at it as a single device. They look at the pump, the controller, and the CGM system as different components, each with their own regulatory framework, so that you can pick and choose what's needed. And as Roman Havorkas' team talked about previously, that is quite important. DIY also played a part at the conference. There were 10 plus posters on DIY systems in the community and various things going on, including pigs. I mentioned pigs because there was quite an interesting poster where they took Loop and Android APS and gave them to pigs to use to see how the algorithms performed in a kind of like a blind trial, which is something you wouldn't generally do on a human. So it's worth going and looking at the ATD website e-posters and finding that one, because it's quite an interesting comparison of the two different underlying algorithms. We had one of the representatives from the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, who happens to be here, presented this poster about the experiences of the DIY technologies in Australia. But there was also a wider range of interesting posters. Jonathan Garfinkel presented this poster, and when I say presented, he was asked to give an oral presentation of it, where he talked about his life as a practical cyborg. And as diagnosed as an adult, he was able to understand how using an artificial pancreas system brought him to a state where he felt more home-like. So he took a different point of view on what using these systems actually does for someone. There was a lunchtime workshop looking at some of the conversations that are being had between HCPs and people with diabetes, and the ethical guidance around it and regulatory, which will produce a report that should come out later this year. And questions were asked in multiple of the main sessions about how things compared to DIY, had DIY been involved in some of their referencing, all these types of things. So it played a part, it was there, and it was very prominent. And there was a Looper meetup on the Friday night, which about 30 to 40 people turned up at. So it was quite well represented. The key message, though, that I think I took from this in relation to automated delivery systems was that which closed-loop system for which person? Individual choice is important. As we now have a situation where controllers might be different and people have different requirements from pumps and from interaction models, understanding what people want out of an artificial pancreas system or an automated insulin delivery system is really important and something that perhaps needs to be considered more carefully. Because let's face it, one size doesn't fit all. And do you want to be the person trying to get the square peg in the round hole? Because it causes a bit of a mess. I mentioned making MDI smarter. So what we saw was a plethora of additions to insulin pens, or the Novo Bluetooth pens, which allow you to upload data. The insulin clock, which is the thing on the right-hand side, or on my right-hand side here, also has built into it a temperature sensor, so if you keep your stuff in the fridge, it tells you whether your insulin's getting too hot. It has a Find My Pen function from your app on your phone. Surprisingly useful, that one, and very loud as well. So it's not just about the technology related to automated delivery, it's also about decision support and other factors. There was also this company called Snack who allow you to take photos of your food. It's a bit like Food Vision that Nerdabetic presented in Wales in November, where it takes a photo, tells you the portion size and the content of your food to making those decisions easier. And this one over here under my fork looks at postprandial glucose compared to the food you've eaten and the insulin you've given to give advice on how to better dose for the food that you're eating. So you're starting to see people introducing some quite cool systems that make living with diabetes with no automation easier and to give better advice about how you can use this stuff. I mentioned longer wearing cannulas. Now these pictures are all from Capillary Biomedical, who have come up with a novel cannula that has a helix made, I think it's copper running through it, but it's a very, very flexible nylon cannula, which means that when it's in the body, it doesn't cause as much damage. Medtronic and Uno Medical being one of the bigger suppliers of infusion sets, have also been looking at this stuff. I think Uno Medical have their Lantern set, which they've been doing clinical trials with. It's worth looking at all of these pictures here. What they're showing is that post-insertion, this particular cannula causes much less damage and effectively scar tissue compared to standard Teflon cannulas. And when it does that, it means that the rate of infusion is maintained and consistent over the lifespan of the cannula, and that's a key aspect of driving length of insertion. So what we expect to see over the next 12 to 18 months is potentially longer lasting cannulas, and you might even get to the point where cannulas can be changed at the same time as your CGM. That's quite a big difference to where we are now, but it's a very important part of pump tech because, let's face it, the biggest issue with any kind of tech that sticks into you is the human technology interface. Psychological care also had a very big part to play in the conference. I like these two pictures that were presented by Mette from the Steno Centre in Denmark. Talks about what happens when you're newly diagnosed, the fact that you have physical symptoms and emotional reaction, that you have to learn technical skills fairly quickly, and there's an instant impact. But also, what about the long-term impact, and how do you manage that with people? There's a lot of evidence that's coming out now that suggests that the way you help people to understand in the first 12 to 18 months about living with diabetes impacts dramatically on the rest of their life and the longer term impact. So people who are well supported in the early days tend to do better over the longer term. So that's a very important aspect. And then of course there's the coming back to it at a later point when you might find yourself in a state where you're suffering distress or burnout and how that can be supported. So it was good to see psychological care getting this kind of focus at a conference like ATTD, which you might think is just about technologies and treatments, but has a big focus on making life with diabetes better. And then beyond insulin. Well, I'm going to start with insulin in the beyond insulin slide. Lilly has another faster insulin coming out probably later this year. We expect it to get CE marked probably early Q2 this year. Why did I put this on here? Well, it's quite interesting. They presented at on the Saturday morning when everybody was hungover after a Friday night out. But what was really interesting about this picture is that they compared people eating and using this new ultra-fast insulin with people who had a healthy pancreas. And if you look at this, after eating, the little black triangles actually had a higher glucose level excursion up to 2 hours after eating than those using the, what they call early, or its trademark, Lyumjev. That's yeah, I know it's a terrible name, right? Lyumjev. Who came up with that? It might be Lyumjev. It might be pronounced differently. We don't know. We've just seen it on the European Medicines Agency documents, and nobody's told us how to pronounce it yet. But coming back to this, you can see that insulin over the first 2 hours after eating is really effective in the trials that they've done. So it raises the question that when we get this available to use, is this going to have a big impact on people's postprandial glucose levels when they've eaten? And if it does, is that going to help reduce HbA1cs, or is it just going to mean people eat worse food because they know it reacts more quickly? I'm going for the latter, personally. It also suggests that use of artificial pancreases and automated insulin delivery systems might benefit from this, because if you look at this, because of the way it acts quickly initially, in its latter stages, it doesn't seem to be quite as effective. If you're using an automated insulin delivery system, it should be picking that up and then applying it. So it could be very well fitted to these types of system. There's also SGLT2, which there is some debate around in healthcare circles. It does seem to help reduce glucose levels, but there are concerns that it causes euglycemic DKA. What does that mean? It means DKA without high blood glucose levels. And obviously, in the type 1 community, there is concern from healthcare professionals as to whether this is a good or bad thing. I personally would want to try it and see how it worked out, but I can understand why there is concern in that space. It may be something to ask about with your healthcare professionals, but you can't guarantee what the response will be. I can't remember. It's sodium glucose. There you go. Yeah. Is it? Oh, is it a tablet? Oh, it's a tablet injection. Okay, there you go. It's tablet. Then there you go. I've not actually seen it. It's just one of these things that is being talked about. Sorry. Okay. So Melissa, if you want to ask any questions about it, Melissa can talk about it and the pros and the cons as to why, if you did look at it, you might have to take a lot into consideration, because it does require you to be very careful about observing your glucose levels and your ketones as you're using it. And then the other point that was talked about beyond insulin was the embedded beta cells. This is the example from ViaCyte, who you may have heard of. They are quite well known in this area now and have been trialling for some time. They've now had 3 different products on the market. There are also at least 2 other companies in the US producing these types of system. This essentially is the ability to embed a little device into the, effectively into the intestinal wall that will produce insulin, and you don't need to have a pump or do injections. It's very exciting technology. It's very much at the early stages. It is in human trials. We'll see where it ends up. It would be nice if you could just have something embedded. Well, it would be a little bit of surgery, have it embedded, and that was all you needed to do. Will it get to that stage? I'm not sure, but it's going through human clinical trials, so let's hope. There's one more that I haven't put on here because there wasn't very much talked about at the event, and that's smart insulins. We know that Novo are looking very intently at this, and I believe they're due to start some sort of human trial later this year of the one they bought from a UK university startup. We'll see how that plays out. It may be that that is as good as some of the AID systems that are being put in place and available right now, but as it stands at the moment, that's still very much in a phase 1 human trial kind of position, and we'll just have to wait and see. So that's a brief run through of ATD that we looked at. There were lots of sessions going on. I'm sure I've missed some things. Other people who were there perhaps can talk about the things they found interesting. Like I know there was a lot of interest in exercise with closed loop, which there were sessions run on. So it's a very, very busy conference and you can't be at everything. So I know of the people who were in the room, Kev was at it, you've got Andrew Mackover who was at it, and Jasmine who was also at it, and Melissa and Partha. So a lot of people who did go, you might, if you want to have a chat with them about it as well, it's an opportunity. I've got a couple of minutes, so if anybody's got any questions, I can see one there. Let me just get you the mic. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick one. Are the slides available after, so we don't have to keep taking?
Yes, they will be.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions at this point, we will move on to the next session, which is Melissa talking about getting started with type 1 technology with an eye towards DIY.
Right, so I'm hopeful that my co-presenter, Caroline, will be very quiet. No, this is multitasking here. I'm going to speak around how do you get started with the tech if right now you don't have the tech in your hand that you would need to do the closed loop stuff that we're all sort of talking about. Could I get a show of hands? Who has the tech that they need already in their hand? Okay, it's quite a lot. Anybody who's here going, I'm not sure I have what I need to go that direction? Got a few. Okay, so knowing that there are folks who have tapped into the live stream who may be on the edge of where do I go from here, I'm going to talk about things that may be already quite familiar to a number of you. But as Tim said, and this is not just about us in the room, it's about expanding the access to everybody. And as Partha said, pass it on. So you may run across somebody who's having some trouble accessing something, and you might be the one who tells them how to go about going their next step. So, right, if our agenda here is, if closed loop is the destination, what's the journey? Starting points and next steps, and potential challenges and opportunities. So, the first step is glucose monitoring. You need to make sure you've got that in hand, insulin delivery, and algorithm and data management. So much like Tim was saying in terms of the interoperability approach that the FDA is taking, these are the components of having a system that helps manage insulin delivery with augmentation. So here we go. If you've got finger sticks, you could go Libre plus a CGM with an accessory to make it give results to your phone automatically, or CGM, mainly Dexcom G6. And I've put a caveat, which is unfortunately covered on the bottom screen here in the room. Finger stick calibration may be required for safety if you're using a Libre plus a CGM accessory. In terms of insulin delivery, if you've currently got pens or a non-loopable pump, your next step would be to get a loopable pump. And what do we mean by loopable? I've put a little list of products, names, and specs over there on the side, and we can talk more about them later on. You're not being quiet. I'm going to move the microphone. Never work with children or animals. So, unless it's the pigs and you're doing an interesting study on closed loop. Right, so more about this when you start talking about exactly what tech do you need, and we're going to cover that more in the afternoon sessions. Next, the algorithm. So I looked up what's the dictionary definition of an algorithm, just to make sure we're all on the same page. A process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations, especially by a computer. Basically, how do you get something to do what you expect it to do without you having to be the one that does it? And in DIY looping, the algorithm sits on a device you carry with you. If you're using the loop, it'll be an iOS device. Some people are using an iPod Touch if they prefer not to have an iPhone. Android APS, you'd use an Android phone. Open APS, you'd have a rig. And I'm sure people can show examples of these things later on. So for data management, this is, okay, we're gonna have to, just one sec. I think she wants to see everybody. All right. So, data management. This is kind of the, oops, I have clinic tomorrow, and I haven't been able to download a PDM because I started using a system with Omnipod, and I didn't really think about how I was going to have to tell my diabetes team what my glucose levels have been and what my insulin delivery has been. So it's step 11 if you're using Loop in the Loop docs, and I'm not quite sure where it sits in the Android APS world or Open APS, but you do need to line up your data management because Diasend or CareLink will no longer be accessible in this world. And I've put Night Scout in bold because that's the one that I think most of us would be familiar with. And then Tidepool, if you're using Loop, is another option. That's a nonprofit company that's based out of the US, and they're the ones that are going to try to commercialize Loop going through the FDA. I've just got an example here of what my Night Scout looks like. This is not live. This is from the other morning when I had an opportunity to take a picture. You can see the blue lines at the top, I hope. Can everyone kind of see that? Have they come through? Okay, so that's the automated insulin delivery going in while I was asleep, and in the morning when I needed a bit more insulin on top of a bolus, and when I needed less because my glucose level was going down. And that's the kind of stuff that you want to see. How is your system working for you? And then if you want to do some reports, this is last weekend, I had a curry on Saturday night. So you can see around 1 a.m. on Sunday, my glucose level is going down, and Loop is working pretty hard to keep me there. But if you compare the direction of the glucose level between Sunday and Saturday, you can see that whatever I had on Friday night, which was probably fish and chips, because we eat fish and chips practically every Friday. I think it was fish and chips. Loop didn't have to work that hard. And this is the interesting stuff you can get out of Night Scout when you start to do some reports. So just wanted to call your attention to that. And you can also get nice breakdowns about how much insulin is being delivered in which way. And if you've logged protein and fat in addition to carbs, you'll get more breakdowns. And then what do you get if you want to do a, how am I doing overall? So this, you can see my lows below 4 look a little bit high in this picture. That's because I still haven't changed from the pregnancy targets, which I probably need to do, I realized as I made this graph. But the idea that if I did the graph for between 4 and 10 millimoles, I'm sitting very pretty, I think, if I'm going to assess my own control. And I look at my standard deviation, and I see my standard deviation is quite low. So those are things that I can instantly check, and I can tell my healthcare team, yeah, we're going in a good direction. So, potential challenges and opportunities that might come in getting yourself towards DIY. Education and settings, clinic support, choice of tech and funding, ongoing maintenance, and forward planning. Rubbish in, rubbish out is the synopsis on this slide. You might really have to do some back to basics checking and testing, and that's something which can be a surprise when people really want to get moving with tech. And if you're going from MDI to a DIY, you've got to spend some time just doing pump and CGM to get your head around it all. Just diving straight in could be a bit of an issue. And then the last thing on here, read the docs. This isn't meant as a, oh, just go read the docs. You know, sometimes people take offense when someone says read the docs. But the truth is, the docs are written by people who understand what they're talking about better than anybody else can explain it in a Facebook comment or a Twitter discussion. So that's why the docs are there. And the book. Not just read the docs, read the book. This is Donna Lynn Lewis's book, and it's available free on artificialpancreasbook.com, or you can buy it on Amazon. Clinic support. So I'm going to touch on this briefly because Sufyan will talk about it in much more depth. Some clinics and individual HCPs are more keen. They've been paying attention, they're actually quite interested. So if you find that the person you're seeing in your clinic says, oh, I don't know about that, it might be that they have a colleague who actually does, or it might be that you might be looking for a change of clinic. And then some that are keen have more or less experience. My diabetes team had some experience with DIY before I decided to do it, but they didn't have experience of DIY in a pregnant patient, and they were so excited that I was their first to be using a looping system and having a baby. And I was happy to work with them. I know other people who would be nervous about being the first in a situation. So whatever you feel, it's fine. It's just about everybody getting their feelings on the table and feeling comfortable with each other. And your team may be learning from you. And that's another thing which, if you've had years of clinic where you thought you weren't learning much, well, they weren't learning much either. But then when things turn around and they're learning something from you, it can really energize the relationship. So to be realistic about what your expectations are of clinic and what their expectations are of you, and also safety first. If you get in a situation where the diabetes team doesn't seem able to help and things are not going so hot, it's up to you to decide whether it's time to take a step back or a step in another direction or a step to a different clinic. Choice of tech and funding. Because I work a lot on access to tech, I'm going to try to run through as quick as I can because we have more tomorrow, or rather more this afternoon on this. Being stuck in a pump warranty period. You know, when people say, oh, I really want to be able to do this, but I'm stuck with a pump that I can't use for it right now. Or being out of warranty with a pump, and the clinic says, we really want you on a pump with a warranty, but the one that you have that's out of warranty would be loopable. So these are things to work with. If the team can't offer certain make of pump, it may be faster to change clinics. We do have a few people I know personally in the room have been the first in their clinic to get their clinic to offer specific makes of pump, but it can be quite a process. So that's just a heads up. And there's a variety of perspectives about whether you should or could use Libre and Meow Meow versus Dexcom G6 around your CGM choice. So I would just say that's worthy of discussion. And next, the pump and CGM funding question. You do need to still to be able to show the evidence of benefit. And this is why I was so keen to make sure we talked about Night Scout. You have to be able to show your data. Saying, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have CareLink anymore. No, nothing's in Diasend, I'm afraid, could actually put your funding at risk. And then final chapter here, ongoing maintenance and forward planning. Data review and reflection. Your data belongs to you. Own it, check it, look at it. If it gets to where you think, oh gosh, you know, I'm having a whole lot of algorithm adjustments, maybe your baseline basals need to look. Or if you think, gosh, I'm having more hypos than I expected I would, maybe it's time to have a look at some of the ratios or the basals. DIY doesn't mean do it alone, though. One of the great things about the community is that by sharing information with each other, we can help each other out within the limits of our knowledge, too. Backup planning. This is really important. You'll run out of battery. Your pump will run out of battery. Your phone will run out of battery. Knowing what will happen and how you'll respond to that, you might run out of insulin, just like if you were on a regular pump. These parts are all still relevant. There is a checklist that includes DIY use, which has been put together by Essentia, and I'm happy to share you the link with anyone who wants to know. Keeping up to date. I see a lot of people turn up on the Facebook group saying, oh, I haven't actually looked in this group for months now. Is there anything new? Well, yes, there's a few different things that might have been refined. Some bugs might have been picked up and fixed. There might be compatibility with devices that didn't exist the last time you looked. So staying on top of things is also part of the job. And then finally, I'd say horizon scanning. As Tim was showing, there are lots of things in the program, lots of things in the pipeline with the companies. And I think each of us might have a jumping off point where we would say, actually, my needs might be met by something which could be ordered by my clinic. And I think it's important to bear in mind that going DIY doesn't mean, oh, now you're outside of that world of the commercial systems forever. It doesn't have to be. I saw a thing when I started looping which said, #we're not waiting, #don't make us do this. So I've had in mind what my jumping off point would be where I'd be prepared to use a commercial system again. And I think that's where the whole field is really heading. There will still be some people in the very front leading the charge, innovating in DIY, but that doesn't mean that I'll always be on that train. And that's okay. So that's the end of my talk. And I'm happy to hand over, Tim, am I handing over?
So now we've got coming up Nina and Raymond, who are going to talk about their experiences of of Caroline and Melissa's talk.
We don't have slides, sorry. That was a great talk, by the way. Thank you. I thought I'll start off, and then Raymond can take over because he does all the techie stuff. I just panic. I'll give you a little bit of a background on why we're here. So our son, Aiden Mirza, was diagnosed just about 2.5 years ago. But prior to that, I want to go back about 7 or 8 months prior to that, he'd got a virus at school in the November of 2016. And he, unlike the other children, kept throwing up. So some of the kids threw up and it stopped after a couple of weeks. He threw up for about 7 weeks straight and lost a lot of weight. And we kept getting told that it's probably a virus and, you know, there was nothing else. We took him to Great Ormond Street, we took him everywhere. That's all we were told. I instinctively thought, no, this is not right. This can't just be a virus doing this. Next few months go on. He's not quite himself. He's still very skinny. The odd occasion throwing up again, and I'm thinking something's not right. We then had a family holiday booked. We went off to Thailand, and in Thailand, in the last sort of week of the holiday, all the symptoms were there. He was drinking loads of water. He was also throwing up a bit. He would get up at night to pee. He would eat lots and lots, but just not put on any weight. We flew back. A week goes by where he's getting better because he's home and he's happy to be home. And then he had one day where he literally couldn't move. He was just really just kind of limp. He kept saying, it feels like someone's sitting on me. At this point, we put him in the car and we said, we're just going to St. Mary's in Paddington because that's apparently a very good hospital with a paediatric department that's excellent. And thank goodness we did. He collapsed in the car, eyes rolled into the back of the head. We did not know if he was going to make it. Raymond carried him into the hospital. They took one prick of his finger and said, did you not know he's type 1? And I said, type 1 what? What are you talking about? I had no idea. At that point, our lives kind of changed, went upside down. And we decided very, very quickly that we were going to be extremely proactive because we found, and this is just our experience, but we found that the NHS were reluctant to give us a lot of information because they kept saying, we don't want to overwhelm you. But we just wanted all the information so that we could make our son well. That's all we wanted. So it was frustrating. And it was so frustrating that my 10-year-old on day 3 said to the nurse, can you just give me the injection because she was taking so long to work out his carbs, which he'd done in about 10 seconds. So he literally grabs the needle off the nurse and goes, I'm going to do it. I freak out. He pinches his leg and we had a comedy moment of, I can do it. I can't do it. I can do it. And this went on for about 10 minutes. We were on the floor laughing because we're going, you don't have to. No, I want to. I'm hungry. So eventually he does. And he went, okay, I can eat now. It was literally a case of, I'm so hungry. If she doesn't get out my way, I'll stab her. So he just ate. And we realized very quickly that he wants to, even at 10, he just wants what I think the psychologist said is to get his life back. It's the way she explained to us is it's a bit of a grieving process when you find out you have type 1 because life as you know it is no longer. So we thought, right, you know, what do we do? And now in fairness, and the truth is, I actually completely fell apart. This man here, no, I did. And you just went, right, that's the problem, let's find the solution. And so we got him back to school because he wanted to go back to school pretty sharpish. Got him back to school and the school were amazing. They would help us just sort of get the meals ready and prepared so we could work out the carbs beforehand. But still being on Novo Rapid, we were told wait for 15 minutes. And he would miss break times, so he wouldn't get to eat in time with everyone else. Anyway, long story short, we cut forward to about 6 months down the road. I get in touch with JDRF. JDRF says to us, right, we need to get you on some equipment. And I said, look, my son wants to be wireless. He didn't want a pump with a wire in it. So she talked about the Omnipod. We'd not heard of Omnipod at this point. So we said, can we try it? And he took to it. He absolutely loved it. And that was the first bit of technology that sort of started to change his life. Then we heard about the Libra. So he got the Libra. We didn't get it on the NHS. There was a massive fight at the hospital where I just went, I don't understand. We've been told there's funding. And to be honest, the stress levels, not just from your child being ill, the stress levels that are increased tenfold are because you just constantly feel like you've got a fight on your hands, whether it's the NHS or whether it's your consultant or whether whoever it is. You just wish that they would actually be more sympathetic to what you're going through. If they don't have someone with type 1 or they don't have it themselves, they don't understand the frustration levels. So eventually we get the Libra, and the combination's okay, but the Libra we found was not very accurate. Sometimes it would say, you know, he's 11 and he was actually 4.9 or something, and we just go, why is he tanking then? I don't understand. So we were getting frustrated. At that point, we met another mother who, as it happens, was at the school. And she said, have you tried Dexcom G6? And I said, no. So we researched that. And Dexcom, you know, we've got the Dexcom. And that combination then really started to change our lives. So that just worked for our kid. Then, again, having talks with JDRF, we were saying, you know, we wish we could get the numbers better. And she mentioned a lovely gentleman who's hiding in the back there called Kev Winchcombe. And she said, talk to Kev. He's amazing. He's part of this DIY community. And at first I thought, oh, DIY community, you know, is it going to be dangerous hacking this pump? And I know nothing of DIY, so I was like, you deal with it. You let me know if it's going to be okay. But Raymond came along, you met Kev, and I'll pass you over probably at this point. But before I leave, I want to say thank you to this community in particular, because once we met you, our lives changed even more for the better. So I cannot thank you enough. I'm going to pass you over.
So is this thing on? Okay, that's good. It's always embarrassing to think you're going to start going, you know, and people are just going to go, what? All right, that's been the majority of the journey. Let me take you back to, I guess, last summer, which is when we started looping, and what the leaping off point, which, by the way, Melissa, what a great talk. I mean, she really laid it out. Everything she said, you know, very on point. And everything she said should lead you to the other things that you should also look at. So definitely, whatever she said, pay attention. This was what happened to us. We had been using the Libra and the Omnipod for a bit, and it was just still very clear that, you know, every time I would look at the reports, you know, he was in range the minority of the time. Maybe at best 44. Oh, look, we're getting up to 50. Ooh, that's great, you know. And then we began to very seriously look at looping. And we were introduced, like I said, you know, Nina had met another mother who had a young girl, and she'd been dealing with this. Very proactive, very strong. And she began to just point us to all the reading, point us to all, you know, the groups, like the public forums. Read this, look at that, get familiar, you know, with the equipment. It sounds like a huge barrier to entry, but there are reasons for it. And it's actually not as big a barrier as you might think. So, fronting the whole DIY business, I actually kind of have an anti-talent for tech. My wife has noticed that anytime I bought a new computer or, you know, I'm downloading some bit of software that I've really been looking for, all she can hear coming from my office is shouting, okay? So I stand before you not as, you know, somebody who's really proficient in, you know, any of the coding languages, PHP or Java or any of this stuff. And neither was Marissa, you know, who really helped us out. She's a lawyer, okay? But she's just a really strong mom. And when you read the literature, it's laid out for you literally like a children's book. So straight away, I'm saying to you now, don't be scared of the reading. If there's stuff within, like there's going to be vocabulary you're not going to be instantly familiar with, and a ton of, like short forms. We live in an age where, if you can't figure out an acronym for what it is you want to say, you're not really literate. So, people don't really use whole words now. They talk about DII, like DIA and stuff like that. But you get familiar with these things because actually they're pretty simple concepts. So, how did we actually do it? You go to the Facebook page, you join Looped. There are like a few different, choices depending on if you're going with this pump and that sensor or this pump and that sensor. But the literature is actually there for you to read. And the reason for you to read it is that it actually changes your mindset. When you start with the pens and the injections, you think, oh, this is how it works. Even though in the back of your mind somewhere you realize, but that's not actually how a pancreas works. And that's the best tool of all. Like, it's a super good tool. It's, my God, until you see one not working, you don't really appreciate how clever the thing is. And then when you read the literature, you start to put the pieces together. And as Melissa did, she really, gave you the right graph. This tells you what your blood sugar is. This delivers the insulin. This bit in the middle actually makes the different pieces of tech talk to each other. So for our case, we went Dexcom plus Omnipod, which means you have to get something called a Riley link. Super clever. This dad invented for his daughter, called Riley, something that speaks radio to a pump and then Bluetooth on the other end. So now they can actually communicate, because you just know instinctively, pump, sensor, you should be talking to each other. Literally, the pancreas does the job of two of you, can't you get it right? And then once you build the actual Loop app, and there's a reason that you have to build it. And when I say build it, I don't mean something complicated. Like a children's book, you've got really simple instructions. Everybody in this room at this point has a smartphone. Everybody in this room at this point has a computer. You've clicked on things. You've swiped things, okay? You've done it. This is very, very, very similar. 1 or 2 bits might look a bit intimidating because you're actually going to be staring at a page of code, but the instructions are by the number. It's like paint by numbers, so don't be intimidated by it. Downloading the Loop app, building it, installing it, you've all installed stuff on your phones. You've all at some point put something on your computer. This really is just that. Then, how do you use it? Because, of course, there's this great expectation, oh, God, I hope it'll work. So let me just caveat this. It's tech. All tech fails at some point. It just does. It's what it does. But you know what? So do other machines. You figure out how to fix them, you move on. All your cars get flat tires. Something goes wrong with your boiler. You don't move out of the house. You fix the stuff and you go on. And it's the same here. So for us, once the programs were downloaded, once Loop was built, and then the stuff goes on, and then you think, oh God, is it going to work? Then you have to realize how to program what is basically a self-driving car. And that's when all the reading comes in really handy. Because by this point, you will already have known how carb ratios worked. But I'll bet you one thing. Most people won't be double-checking their insulin sensitivity, their correction factor, nearly as often as they should, because they think they have to go back to a straight test where you've got to do the fasting and all that. Actually, with the tech, you don't. You trial it, and you respond, and it responds. So we were a little bit at sea to begin with, but like I said, thanks to people like Kev, and thanks to somebody else that we also connected with in North America. They'd been doing it for a bit longer, and that was the great gift for us. Having people on the end of a phone, having people who would just respond to you, on WhatsApp or with email. That was so reassuring, because you don't know. You just genuinely don't know what to do. And then they'll say, try this, take a look at that. And you calm down, you go, okay, I will do that. So some things begin adjusting straight away. And the biggest adjustment is the fact that now you are having micro adjustments every few minutes. When Melissa showed you her Night Scout chart, there was a blue line that was kind of going like this. I don't know how many of you saw that. That one's the most important sort of thing that you could look at. That is loop at work, making micro adjustments. Oh, you know, don't need so much insulin. Oh, you need a lot more, you know. Oh, and it's doing this on its own. And it's amazing the security that that can give you when it works. Then you learn, okay, well, hang on a second. He's got the insulin. He's got the carbs. Why did he just hypo? Why is he hypering? You know, why is this not working? And you go back to the literature and you realize it's a matter of timing. So the carbs are doing this, and the insulin to meet it is doing that. And they have to match up. And these are things you figure out sometimes on a food-by-food basis. Everybody knows pasta and pizza. Kids love it. It's a bugger. Like, you know, and very often the stuff doesn't do the same thing twice. You know, it's literally like it's I'm going to get you. You know, thought that worked last time, not going to work this time. So it does all these things. But actually, over the longer term, you figure out the larger patterns. You can figure out some of the smaller ones. And so when you finally get to what is right for you, then the numbers settle down and the ride becomes a lot easier. Responding to an emergency crisis response is probably the most common thing for handling type 1 diabetes. Going up, going down, do something, you know, like go faster, slow down. What this does is it smooths the ride out because it's working every few minutes. And that is the single biggest contribution that it makes. As it goes through the night, it stabilizes. So, you know what? Maybe you don't come down straight away. Maybe you'll come down in 60 minutes. That's fine. What's the bigger picture? Have you been in range mostly, you know, for the last 24 hours? And you do tend to take it day by day. Okay, that's fine. And then having taken it day by day, you start to take it week by week. Okay, couple of bad days. But how were the previous couple of weeks? All right. And so on, and it gets bigger. How was your past month? How was your past half year? So here's the proof of the pudding. I told you before that just with the Libra and the Omnipod, Aiden was in range maybe 40% of the time. 50 was like a, you know, right on moment. Just looked at my phone before I walked in. So he's been in range now 73% of the time since about October. He's had a couple of days which have actually been at 100%. But here's some perspective that I was also given by other people who are much farther down the road, you know, than we've been. Don't worry about that too much. 70% is a great benchmark. One of the pieces of advice that I was given was don't you know, obsess over getting him to some ridiculous high number, because the truth is that that'll also have a price. So, you know, you're driving the numbers down because you're scared that he's going to be out of range, and that leads to all sorts of complications with damage throughout the years. But, okay, if there are too many hypos, which really, at the end of the day, can only be corrected with sugar, okay, that's going to lead to other conditions which themselves will damage. So don't get to 80, 90%, you know, while thinking, oh, it's okay because I'm just having, you know, like a few dextrose or a few this or that. That's going to have an effect. And that'll take as long to, you know, damage you, but it will damage you. So, you know, when we have a bad week, like for instance, I just told you, great numbers, yay, you know, 73% for more than 4 months, and sometimes it's been better than that. 2 weeks ago, it was terrible. Literally, I mean, we just couldn't, he got a cold. He's a kid in puberty. You know, all these things just conspire to make life hell. And we couldn't, for love or money, get him down. So just as we were feeling good about, you know, hitting 75%, yeah, he had 2 really terrible weeks. But, you know, a terrible week changes even, like, in definition. He functioned completely. And, you know, he went about his business. He played. He went to school. He did his, you know, he did his stuff. He was a real pain in the ass, you know, like, which is a great sign of health. You know, you're healthy enough to really irritate me. So our journey has been one in which we've learned a few parameters to adjust. So now we know, okay, this is bad for a couple of days. It should probably be getting better by the third day. If it isn't, all right, what should we, let's take a look at what needs to change. There's a bit of a pattern. Every evening he's tanking. Maybe the evening carb ratio is not so good. But oh, hang on a second, like, you know, the range is also huge. Why don't we just adjust, you know, the sensitivity factor, okay? And these are things which before you thought, wow, it's just written in stone. You know, my sensitivity is 5-to-1, so it has to be that. No, really. And that was one of the things that also was really eye-opening for me, because people were saying, hey, just change this, and I was shocked. Here's a big one. The basal rate, looping, really doesn't exist. And that was just really like a step back moment. What do you mean the basal rate doesn't exist? Of course he does. He's this in the morning and that in the afternoon. No. Think again of that blue line. It's doing this. It's doing it as you talk. There is no effective basal rate. So we just have one that's set at 0.7. It's really there, you know, like to be polite. Seriously, because, I mean, his parameters are such that if he needs it, he can get 5.6 minutes per hour. That means every 15 minutes, he's getting a unit and a bit if it thinks that he needs it. Or it'll just slam on the brakes. Sometimes it won't let you deliver the insulin, but it'll let you input the carbs. So that means that as it senses, you know, the sugar going up, it knows the carbs are there, and it's working out how long they're going to be in effect for. You know, fast is maybe, what's fast, like an hour and a half? Mm-hmm. Medium, like, you know, you get to terms with your glycemic index. So medium is 2 and a bit, long is 4, but even say with pizza, like with pizza and pasta, you can set it for 8 hours just for that meal. So your ride stops doing this so much. It does a lot more of that, okay? And thus far, it's worked out. We couldn't be more grateful. Also because we went the, you know, like the full distance and, you know, dug into our pockets and got him an Apple Watch, which just made me spit nails. You were walking around with more computer equipment than put men on the moon. You know, and he's a 12-year-old boy, so you can see he's just, you know, like what he doesn't lose, he breaks. So, but in class, this means he gets a little buzzing on his wrist telling him how he's going. He just leans over and taps it, and the business is done. That's how he boluses. That's how he corrects. That's how he triggers his overrides. So at lunch, he doesn't walk up, you know, like wait in a special queue to be handed a pre-plated, you know, bit of food. He just stands in line with everybody else. Because we switched to FIASP, which is very fast acting, and that's another thing you have to learn. Ooh, you know, maybe you should be pre-bolusing before meals, or with something that acts super fast, really don't. So now he boluses as he sits down to eat. That's a big thing. So in terms of quality of life for him, you know, he's just going with the flow. And yeah, there are going to be times when, you know, it'll go wrong. But if you have this overwhelming, you know, amount of time when things are okay, you've got the legs to deal with when things go wrong. So that's been our journey. And like I said, I'm not advocating it for everybody, but I'm telling you that legitimately, this is what's happened with us. It's not as hard as it seems. You do have to do some work, but you've got to do work for everything, okay? And the best thing is, people are there to help, you know? The best thing that I was able to do was talk to somebody else who was just so scared. Nina does this all the time, and Aiden started doing it. He started helping people, okay? And it's important for everybody to know that's out there. So, you know, it's not just that the truth is out there, it's probably not, but, but the help is. So, thank you very much.
Thank you both for that enlightening presentation, and very encouraging, I hope, for everybody in the room who isn't looping yet. If you mind leaving your mics on the table. Next up, we have the industry presentations, and we also have a panel discussion around this topic. I'm going to hand you over to Partha, who will be running this session.
Okay, so we have some short presentations from industry, and in the past when we've had this, the whole thing I ask you all to bear in mind is industry are here as part of as being our partners, okay? So be aware of that. Let's work together is the whole principle. So I know there are lots of questions. We'll have a Q&A session. You can also, you're very welcome to ask me questions in the policy role I have as to what we are doing about it, because it's not just industry's job, it's also our job to do something about what's going on with the DIY and everything. So so I think the 5-minute presentations, each from, if I get the Medtronic, hello, hands up, who's there? Excellent. Tandem? Tidepool? Excellent. And finally, Diaboloop. Excellent. So we've got a 4-minute presentation thereabouts, give or take. I will stop you. All right? And once we've done that, we'll take some questions, and then there were some very quick lightning pitches from little short snippets of what other partners, industry partners are doing. So that's going to play. And the whole concept of this is, the event is around looping. So what is industry doing? Where are you? What's the future? And what can you actually, publicly say at the moment with everything that's there? So shall we start? Medtronic, first of all, please, thank you very much.
Let me just see if it works. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm Liesl Botha, and I'm an educational specialist for Medtronic. And I'm really excited to join you here today. A year ago, my colleague Mark, I don't know if anyone was here, was just introducing the 670G pump to you. So we're a year on now, to give you a little bit more information. So we know at Medtronic that actually you guys have a lot to deal with every day. There's calculating corrections, there's testing your basal rate if you're on a pump, if you're looping, you have to figure out how to do that. There's calculating corrections, boluses, and just there's a lot going on. So one of the things that we are really keen about at Medtronic is really improving quality of life. It's one of our mission statements, but also just looking at improving and just really making life easier for you. And at the moment, we are all looking at HbA1c. When you go into clinic, that's one of the readings that they'll be looking at and be discussing, and it's almost that judgmental number that you get at the end of every 3 months going, oh, I'm not doing too well. And that's because of these two big trials, the DCT and the JDRF trials, where we've actually proved that reducing HbA1c has a long-term beneficial effect on long-term complications. But it doesn't really actually show how well you are controlled. It doesn't show how many percentage of time you spend low and high. It's just that one little number which you are judged upon. So time in range, someone mentioned it, is really, really the key that we're looking. And time in range being defined between 3.9 and 10. And this is more of because we know HbA1c doesn't measure the risk of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. It doesn't show you what percentage of time you spend in those ranges. And we see so many people with these two faces of HbA1c. You have someone going into clinic with a brilliant HbA1c, but actually if you look at what's really going on, it doesn't show how well someone is controlled. It can be spending lots of time in lows, lots of time in highs, but on average it looks all right. You get another person who actually is not doing too well with 63% time in range. And they are both being congratulated on their diabetes control. And I will be a millionaire every day. Someone says to me, no 2 days are the same. We base our pumps up until this point have had standardized basal rates, and we do those basal rate testing, and to a certain extent it works. But people come and say, no 2 days are the same. I do the same thing every day, but I don't get the same result. So we know that fixed basal rates with various glucose results. SmartGuard technology in the Medtronic pump delivers the basal rate every 5 minutes, about 288 times a day based on your sensor. And this results in improved time in range without increasing hypoglycemia, and also decreasing the glycemic variability. And this is basically how it works. The pump does very similar to what your DIY loop system will do. It reads the glucose values and adjusts the basal rate. But it works out its own algorithms. So you have to wear the pump in a manual mode for a few days where it can learn your needs of insulin. And then it will adjust the basal rate and try and achieve a target of around 6.7. That target is not changeable. That's a fixed target. And in fact, when you are in auto mode of the pump, there's very few things that you can control. The only thing that you have control over is your insulin to carb ratio and your active insulin time. The pump will work out itself what your basal rates are, what your minimum basal rate is, your maximum basal rate, your insulin sensitivity factor. You can't do dual and square wave boluses in the pump because the basal rate takes care of all of that. So it does take a lot of the mental burden away from diabetes. So this is just to kind of point out, when I saw this slide for the first time, having been in this education, or in education for a long time, it made me feel a little bit disheartened because we've been testing basal rates for years and years and years and years. But actually, if you see overnight, so this is presumably the time when your glucose levels are meant to be stable, but to achieve a stable glucose level, if you look at this patient, it's 1 or 4 nights in a row of one patient. The glucose level is that flat line there at the top, or the relatively flat line, this one here, this one. And then you have your basal rate delivery. And as you can see, it varies widely from night 1, but specifically night 4, when hardly any basal rate was delivered with the same glucose level results with the others. So just a little bit about what Medtronic are doing and where we are going. So a lot of you will be familiar with our products. But we started with suspend on low. We were really excited when that came out because the pump suspended when you were low. So we used to set those levels slightly higher because we didn't want you actually to get to that low limit. And that was great, but if you were running at a really good level, it would suspend all the time and kind of had the opposite effect. And then we brought out suspend before low. So that is the pump, and this is the 640G, which a lot of people are still on, where the pump proactively will suspend the basal rate when a patient is approaching hypoglycemia.
Last 30 seconds.
Pardon?
Last 30 seconds.
Pardon?
Last 30 seconds. You got 30 seconds.
Oh, sorry. Okay, fine. I thought you said it's suspended 30 seconds. I went, no, it doesn't. Okay, we'll move on. So it will suspend the basal rate when it. So now we are at 670, where it will actually reduce the variation of the glucose levels by adjusting the basal rate. Eventually, we'll get to a hybrid closed loop system where the pump will help with corrections, because at the moment you still have some interaction with the pump. And then eventually where it will learn your patterns. Getting there, don't take me off. This is the components of the pump. You have the pump, a glucose meter that links up with the pump to help you with your calibrations, CareLink, which is really important to look at the data retrospectively, insulin delivery, and a new sensor, which is a very accurate sensor to be used on the arm and on the abdomen. And it measures sensor health as well. It has to be accurate to do the basal rate delivery. So it's got a MARD of 8.7. The pump can be used in 2 modes, auto mode and then manual mode. So if you wish, you could still use it as a basic insulin pump, add a CGM to it, and then use it in auto mode, what we call. All right? Nearly there. Just the slide, and then I'll go. So how are we doing? How are we doing at the moment with time and range? This is the only commercial available system that can achieve a time and range of 72% based on a pivotal trial and looking at real life people. We looked at CareLink reports of many of our patients. And at the moment, there's about 215,000 people wearing this worldwide. Compared to older systems or any other system on the market available, the time and range can be, on average, 64%, and on pump alone, that's about 54% time and range. So it makes life a little bit easier. Done.
Right.
Leave you with a time.
Thank you. What haven't told the industry is that every 30 seconds they go over.
Oh, we're fined. Don't go there.
There's 300 free pumps to the NHS. So thank you, Medtronic, for your great contributions. So, you want to go next?
Yep. Hi, so my name is Marc Julien, and sorry, I'm French, and so yes, I'm on the other side of the channel, and...
Can I just say 48% of us still love you?
Okay. Yeah, I know, and in London more than that, right? Yeah. And so, so I'm here to present you, and I know that Eric last year was there to present you the update on what we're doing with Diaboloop. So I'm not going to go too far in that, but what we do is we have an automated system that is CE marked, and we have already patients living with the commercial system in France. It's composed of an insulin pump, the Kaleido pump. We don't manufacture that. It also includes a CGM, the G6. We don't manufacture that. We are only focused on developing the algorithm and the tool for you to be able to watch the data on our system called YourLoops. Our system is extremely simple to start, extremely efficient to work, and also very personalized. And let me explain you why. So when you want to start with it, you just need to input those 3 elements, and the system will work absolutely fine. And why is that? Because in it, there is an auto-learning system that will learn all the patterns and all the things that you do and how you react to insulin. So you won't need to do that, and you won't need to include that. Now, if you wanted to do it, then you can do it. You can change it, because our motto within Diaboloop is we want to provide you with a system that you want to use with the changes and the modifications you want to have. If you want to use it, with letting go and not, worrying about it, you may. If you want to actually be very active on it, you also may. I mean, it's a system for you and not us to decide what you want to do. So how does it work in real life? And yes, some of you be familiar with that kind of profile. And the reason for that is because we're working with Typepool, and we have exchanged codes, and we are contributing to Typepool because we think it's a great, platform to work with. And so we have adapted it to our needs. And here you can see, for example, yeah. So here you can see, like all my other colleagues, you've got the constant adjustment of the basal rate, which changes every 5 minutes according to where your glucose level is. And if during the night you're somewhat a bit high, it will automatically adjust with some microboluses. And when you will declare a meal to the system, he will calculate how much insulin you need, and it will prompt you to validate that amount, because obviously if you declare a meal and you don't take it, and if the insulin goes, it can be problematic. So, and here how it goes. So you have here the declaration of the meal, and that the bolus that goes. And should you go slow, low, or maybe go low at some point, it will recommend to take some rescue carbs. So if during the night, for some reason, as we were saying before, not every day or not every night is the same. If for some reason you're starting to go low, the system will, of course, alert you, but also will recommend you to take an amount of the carbs, so you don't have to make the calculation. And then, your glucose level will go up again. This one is, as you saw, I mean, this is a real life one, right? I'm not. I just took one that was available. That person is 91% time in range. That person, as you can see, is declaring all or his or her meal, and so they are somewhat active on the system. And And here, somebody decided that, he had a closed loop. And again, this is a real life, situation. Decided to test the system. And so he went for Burger King and, somewhat, high level of carbs. And as you can see, we controlled it. I mean, the system controlled it. And, the night after and the day after was pretty good. So in terms of results so far, as I said, we did pivotal, as everybody, we did a pivotal trial to get our CE marking, where we had patients that wear the system and didn't wear the system, and they were their own witness. For that, we got a 14% improvement in the time in range. Now, with the patients having lived with the system since now May 2019, we've got a group of 34 patients that we're financing the system for in France. And their average point of those patients are around 50%, 53% time in range before getting onto the system, and they all, on average, improve by 18.4. Sadly, that number is a bit, lowered because one patient has decided actually not to declare any meals anymore. So the system actually is working a hell of a lot to catch up with the non-declaration of the meals. And that person is, between 50 and 60%, an improvement of between 5 to 10% point. And she's happy because she's a single mom, she's a nurse, and frankly, she said, now I can live. So what are our next steps? I mean, obviously, the first thing is we will be commercialized in France. We just got 2 weeks ago the approval from the equivalent of the NHS to be able to negotiate prices with the French Reimbursement Authority. We have just launched a pivotal trial for the FDA to get approved by the FDA. We are, as I said at the beginning, we are committed to provide you a system that works with, as you want. So we can be connected to, for the moment, 2 pumps. We're working with other pump manufacturers to be able to offer you the system, regulated and safe with the pump you like and the pump you want. We are working on a system for kids. We've got a design specific for the kids and for teens. And for teens, one of the things, and that struck me, sorry, I can't remember, I can't see you, but it struck me when you talked about how feeling at school different can be a problem. And so we actually have in the labs and and we'll be trialing it back end of this year, a system with undeclared meal. So people will be able to actually have a system that is ready for patients not declaring meal. Because for the moment, our system now, it's better if you declare the meals, but the next generation, and it will be tested first for teens with undeclared meals. And the other one I'd like to, and it's a bit sad that I'm on the picture because really that's one that we're extremely proud of, is we have today 10 patients that have a very, very, very difficult management of their diabetes, like, extremely variable and with lows and highs, people didn't really understand why. And so the French authority asked us to provide our solution, but a different one where we open all the securities, because obviously we need to have the securities, to open all the securities, provide that to our engineers and to our doctors, and say, try on them and see whether we can do something. And the results are just amazing. I got the shivers still talking about it. For some, we can't see the difference on the curves between somebody that has, as we call it, I mean, I know it's not the best way to but a very unstable diabetes, and we can't see the difference with somebody with that and somebody with our system running on it, and the results are just amazing. I mean, I was just receiving an email yesterday, somebody moving from like 9 to 6, and very stable. So extremely proud, and we are actually going to have a CE mark on that solution also, and we will be commercializing, but that's a bit down the road. Well, thank you very much. We are here with Stephanie to answer all your questions if you had some. And thank you for the invitation.
Can I ask who's got the next? Is it tandem? So, type pool next.
Tandem next.
Oh. Is it tandem next? Whichever you say. You're the boss.
Tandem's next.
Tandem is next. Tim says tandem is next. Tandem is next. So, welcome to the stage. Clearly, one of the snappiest dressers today. I did promise you I'd make a mention.
Thank you, Partha. Yes, you said you were going to mention that. So I don't have any slides this morning. My name is Simon Treadwell. I work for Air Liquide. I'm the head of the diabetes business in the UK. We represent Tandem Diabetes Care, so we're not the manufacturer, we're the distributor in the UK. We introduced the T-Slim pump to the UK market about this time last year in 2019. That first pump, what I'm going to do is explain the kind of journey we're on. That first pump was G5 enabled, so it linked with the Dexcom G5 system. Later in 2019, in September, we did a software update into the pump, because this pump you can do remote software updates, to move that pump to G6 technology. So we did that, and at the same time we introduced what is known as a basal IQ algorithm. So that is a predictive low glucose suspense system that runs in our pump. That's what we currently have in the UK. And you will have probably seen that at the end of last year, 2019 December, the FDA approved the next software update, the next algorithm that you can get in the T-Slim pump, which is Control IQ. So Control IQ is now being used in the US. You may have read that on some of the social groups, etc., to see how people are doing with that. We will roll that out later this year. What Control IQ does is go to the next step. So as well as helping manage hypos, it helps manage the hyper state as well. So similar to some of the other systems, it has a mid-range that it works on. If you start going low, it will first of all adjust the basal level, then it will move to a suspend situation if it needs to. So that's slightly different to how basal IQ is working. Basal IQ just suspends when it's predicting that low in the future. On the highs as well, when it sees the patient is going high, it starts to adjust basal first to see if that can manage the situation. If it doesn't, it will then give a correction bolus. So it's doing that full element that is classed as an advanced hybrid closed-loop system. So that is what we will get later this year. Okay?
Brilliant.
Happy? In time?
You guys might even get a discount. Yeah. Right, so last but not least, can we kindly have Tidepool, please, to come along?
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Garrett Neeson. I'm an engineer at Tidepool. So Tidepool is a non-profit developing open source software for people with diabetes. Before I get to the closed loop control stuff, I just quickly want to tell you what the Tidepool platform is, for those of you that may not know us. So with the Tidepool platform, it's basically open source software that allows you to upload data from all your various devices, whether that's a pump, a CGM, or a blood glucose meter. You've already seen our Tidepool web platform this morning when Diabolu presented it. This is the Tidepool uploader. This is one of the ways of getting your data into the Tidepool platform. And it's also the piece of software that I'm responsible for and spend most of my time working on. It allows you to upload data from all of Omnipod's pumps, all of Tandem's pumps, Medtronic's 500, 700, and 600 series pumps, as well as Animas pumps, rest in peace. And then also for CGMs, Dexcom G4, G5, G6, as well as Libre and Libre Pro, as well as Medtronic's Guardian and Enlight sensors. And then there's, of course, a whole range of different blood glucose meters for the whole list. Go and have a look at tidepool.org/devices. Now, it was just over a year ago that I was on the stage able to tell you that Tidepool has kicked off a project called Tidepool Loop, which essentially is taking the DIY Loop app and putting it through its paces with the FDA to get it FDA cleared and fully supported as an iPhone app in the App Store. So essentially, you won't need any additional hardware anymore. You just need your pump, CGM, and the automated insulin dosing algorithm that is running on the phone that adjusts your basal rates up to every 5 minutes and allows you to bolus from the phone. Now, last time I was able to announce that we've partnered with Insulet and that a future version of the Omnipod system will work with Type Loop. In the meanwhile, we've also been able to announce that the Dexcom G6 receiver will be able to work with Type Loop in future. And a future Bluetooth-enabled MiniMed pump from Medtronic will also be able to work with the Type Loop system. So, what have we been working on in the meanwhile? Well, we've grown quite a bit. We're more than doubled in size to around 45 people. We're still growing. This picture here was taken, I think, about 4 months ago, and we've added a bunch of people since. You may recognize Peter in the corner, he was actually mentioned earlier as the developer of the Riley Link. He's now working for us. Yeah, this is a little bit cut off there. So basically, what we've been working on is mainly device integration. So we need to make sure that all the core functionality that is available in the different partner apps is available in the Type Loop app. So basically that you don't need a separate Dexcom app, but that you can just work with the Type Loop app, your pump and your CGM, and that you don't need any additional apps in order to get the system up and running. We've also been working on building out our training materials and documentation, working on expanding our customer support team, and working on developing our prescription flows. Now, I don't have a release date for you yet, unfortunately, but what I can tell you is that we are focused on getting cleared by the FDA first and launching in the USA first, and then internationally. So Typal has employees in 5 countries, including myself, based here in the UK and Swansea in Wales. And we know that diabetes is a global issue, and we're definitely committed to launching internationally as well. But given that we're not a large, big company, we are kind of focusing to make sure that we get launched in the USA first, and then from there take it further. So if you want to know more about Typal Loop, have a look at typal.org/loop. You can sign up there for updates. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I get the 4 companies you just presented on stage? We probably need one more chair. So if I could invite you guys back up, if that's okay. So this is the Q&A session before we do the 1-minute quick lightning pitches by the other companies. So please do take a seat. And as you can see, those of you who have heard the 4 presentations, so this is very much open. So if anybody's got any burning questions to kick off, please say who it's aimed at or whether it's just general for everybody. And let's go. Maureen, you've got your hand up first. So Maureen, go for it.
Thank you. I'm on a T-Slim, but I use the T-Slim in a Dexcom G6, but I use, instead of going to the Dexcom Clarity to look at my results, I use Typal because it's great because I can see my pump data as well as the sensor integrated in one screen. What I'm concerned about, and this is related to Tandem and Air Liquid to a degree as well, I know that I've heard that Tandem are looking at having their own data system for results, and I think it's going to be on phones or whatever. I'm really concerned about whether Tandem are going to change things such that I won't be able to see my Tandem results on a system like Typal, and whether actually you're going to maintain that openness of being able to see those results.
So yes, that's been my discussion with Tandem, is to say, okay, they have their own, what is called T-Connect in the US, their own system that runs from a mobile phone. But we wanted reassurances they'll continue to use DiaSend and they will continue to work with Typal going forward so that patients and clinics have the choice. And that is what they have responded with, to say, yes, they're not bringing their own one forward to stop working with everybody else. It's just another option because that's what they have in the US. They want to offer that elsewhere.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, Typal does have a very good relationship with Tandem. I don't see that anything going anywhere soon. So yeah, definitely we're committed to working together.
Question there, please. Yep, go for it.
So as a
So to Medtronic, I'm on Android APS. I'm using an out-of-warranty pump. It's not ideal. We've talked about integration and interoperability of hardware. This is clearly where the industry is. It's an interim stage and it's short-lived. Could I please ask, strongly ask, that during this very short relative period of time, the pump manufacturers support users by providing free refurbishment of those pumps so that we can use them during this very short period of time safely and without any more stress and wellness issues that come with it. So that's my request to the pump industry. Just during this period of time, help us out by providing us with that security, providing us with that service, and then I might consider being a Medtronic user for life.
So I'll answer part of that on the behalf of industry, because this is, you're absolutely right. This is a topic which comes up time and time again. Anybody who's on social media will see it. I'm also aware that, so that's a conversation, just to put it in context, that we have had with Medtronic on a global basis and with other companies. That's what ATTD was about. So it is, I suspect, probably I don't want to speak for her. She could probably commit to whatever she can, but I think commercial laws and whatever will prevent her from committing anything at this point of time. But rest assured that this is firmly in our focus. So one of the other questions Maureen asked, for example, data interoperability as well. All industry partners here know very well our commitment from NHS England. We have clearly said, going forward, if you don't share your data, we'll have to rethink whether we get your device. It's as straightforward as that. We are not making any two bones about it. I'm not going to ask everybody to open up 65 different platforms in clinic. So to your question, that is also on the radar about the short period and what people can do to help make lives better. So that's all I can say from our point of view. I'll let you answer on behalf of industry what you can feasibly answer.
Thank you so much for that, and absolutely hear what you're saying. As you were saying, Partha, we are governed by licensing agreements. We are governed by the safety of our patients, and that's always the first thing that we have to look at. And having a pump outside that is maybe not working properly, as saying, can potentially go wrong. And I think that's just the one concern that we always have, is the safety of patients and making sure that they're on products that are safe to use.
Okay. Yep. Ben, you had a question?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for those presentations. My question's for Diabeloop. The premise or the idea of an automated system where we don't input for food is almost the holy grail, at least in my very humble opinion. And I think particularly with kids, where, let's be frank, they don't always do what you want them to do. I hate to mention the B word, but obviously, you know, you're based in France, and it's no surprise that that will be the first market. Does Brexit put us to the back of the queue in terms of launch? Is it a case of EU and then us a few years later, or is there any effect from the changes that we're expecting towards the end of the year?
I'll answer that question. No, is the short answer to that. So I think it's business as usual. I think it's about who takes the initiative to move. It's as simple as straightforward as that. There are plus and minuses to Brexit as far as rules go. I'm not saying about the overall picture. We've also engaged with Diabeloop specifically on that, and our very clear remit to them and to Tidepool has sat down with Howard over a long conversation. It's a very, very simple we have put down as NHS England to all companies. Tell us when you're ready. It's as straightforward as that. Tell us when you're ready. We are here. We'll chat. We'll discuss. We'll get it in the system. So I think Diabeloop know that. Tidepool know that. And the game is open, so to speak. But they need to... So no shut door from us. But it won't put us back of the queue, if that makes sense.
I get that from an NHS point of view. But if you look at launch dates in Australia, New Zealand, you know, do we become that smaller market?
So to be completely transparent with you, we go where people want us to be. Yes, we're French, so of course all the KOLs and our main relationship was in France. But actually, the German people and the German open loop community and the doctors and the payers have actually asked us to come in Germany, and we are maybe we will be launching first in Germany, then in France. And we are, as you know, Partha said, in very close discussion with them to see whether we could do or not something, you know, with the NHS. The other concern, and that just not for me, but for all my colleagues, is that regulation is a tough thing, and sadly, I don't know how much that will impact now that Brexit is done, but the MDR, which is the new regulation coming up end of May, is going to make things for us way more complex to actually put products on the market. And so we will have to do and demonstrate the safety net, of course, for the patients, which is great. The only thing is that we want to make sure is that they go at a pace that, you know, we can provide the solution for the patient. So my answer to you is UK for us is, you know, just, you know, it's closer to be in London than to be down in Marseille. So, you know, there's no reason. The only discussion is, you know, with the authorities and see how we can promote that solution. I know that the G6 is currently reimbursed. I know that they're talking to the Kaleido, the Vicentra company that is actually manufacturing the Kaleido, and I know they have operations in the UK. So, you know, us to be connected to it, it's just, you know, us to be there. And it's simple to connect. So the short answer is, as soon as we can agree with Partha, you know, we can come in the UK. No, that's mine.
Please.
Hi, Partha, this is a question for you. Does the NHS consider the environmental impact of some of these products? I've got a specific issue with Dexcom, which I love. I'm wearing on my arm, absolutely fantastic. I begrudge the fact that at the moment I can get, you know, for the last year I've got between 30 and 40 days out of each sensor. I tape it over after 10, reset it, keep going. Transmitters will last me 6 months typically. My next transmitter is a Firefly transmitter. It's going to be very difficult for me to get it out one-handed from my arm. So I'm probably not going to get that length of life. Putting the cost issues aside, I begrudge throwing all that plastic every 10 days into the bin after I've inserted a sensor when I know that sensor will last for 30 days. And, you know, I don't understand why they can't charge more. You know, they need to make a profit, otherwise we're never going to see new technology. I fully understand that. But why don't they charge more, reduce their manufacturing costs, reduce their haulage costs, and let us, you know, have to carry fewer things around with us every time we go travelling?
So there's a philosophical answer to it, and there is a actual answer as to what is happening. So the philosophical answer is absolutely, you know, unless you're blind, you'll have seen the impact of environment, or unless you're Mr. Trump, whatever. But in generally speaking, I think it's a big focus of NHS in the recently launched that the NHS needs to be more green in every procurement we do. There is also the issue of industry playing their part. So what we always encourage and try and see is what competition comes into play and what we favor. So we have the strength in our procurement arms where we could say, actually, this is what we want, right? So there are products now coming out which are, or their claim is, we are fully environmentally friendly, disposable kit. Now, if we turn around and say we'll start favoring those, that puts pressure on industry to sort of adapt as well. So I think there are many levers we can pull. But I can assure you it is very much, and it's the same thing with the Libra as with the Dexcom. The things are there and it's plastic, etc. So we do need, and there is a social responsibility towards it. Now, don't forget that in the NHS before 2 years ago, we didn't have this explosion of technology. It's suddenly, we have sort of geared ourselves up. We're now talking about give continuous glucose, pregnant with type 1. And then next year, over the next 2 years, we've got big plans to expand it. Now, this will be a firm focus. So that's a conversation. Thank you for raising it, but I can absolutely assure you that's definitely in the mix. So when we go for procurements, one of the things we'll talk about data sharing. One of the things we'll talk about is being environmentally friendly. We can name our terms if we so choose. But the balance is by naming those terms, we don't want to pick a product which doesn't work either. So, you know, so you have to be balanced. There's no point in being friendly to the environment to a kit which doesn't do anything. So that's the balance.
Can I add to that? Whilst you may be getting 30 days out of a sensor, there are an awful lot of people who don't get 10 days out of a Dexcom G6 sensor. So it's not just about the individuals who are able to extend these things to long life. There are a fair number of users who do not get the full setup life out of it, and who, when they're getting to 10 days, are seeing quite a lot of data issues as well. So there's a lot more to this than just the fact that there's a lot of rubbish that comes out of these things. I completely agree with that, and it'd be great if we could reduce that. But the advertised life isn't just dependent on those people who are getting a long life out of it. A significant portion of users don't.
Yep. Okay, question in the front.
Hi guys, thank you for your presentation, which I thought was great. I unfortunately am partially sighted due to diabetes. What are you each doing to help those who have vision issues to access your the data? Because when I see the data as you have it presented today, I can't see any of that. So I'm just interested to know what you're doing to help those who can't see such data.
Anybody in the industry want to go for that?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that. We've actually just employed somebody at Tidepool who is very much focused on accessibility, and it is definitely becoming a focus for us, and it's something that we know we need to improve, and it is something that we are busy working on.
Okay. Question at the back, there, and then there. Yeah, there.
Morning. I've been on a pump for 12 years now, and obviously there are 4-year periods, but I'm at the point now that I'm changing my pump, and again, I've chosen one already. Is there a possibility that if we get a pump for 4 years, we can actually get it back to manufacturers, they can refurbish it, and someone else can use it if we move on to another technology, which again saves NHS money, etc.?
Well, industry?
I mean, regarding that, there's one issue is that when you get the pump back, you need to make sure that you can send it back to somebody, and that it's fine, when you refurbish it, that it's actually clean and all that, and actually that is a process that is extremely complex, and so.
Can I just add to that? So years and years and years ago, we used to do that with old pumps, Medtronic pumps. I was still working in South Africa for them. And it actually created a lot of problems because we couldn't actually guarantee that those pumps were safe to use. At the moment, that's where we are with 4-year warranty. It's a safe product. It's one that we can upgrade. And, they have a very low tolerance of replacing products. Even the tiniest little crack, have to send back that pump so that we can change it over, so that we make sure that you're on a safe pump.
Okay.
Given that the warranty is 4 years and the average pump age, I think when the study was released about 2 years ago, was 2.8 years, why do we have 4-year warranties on pumps? Why don't we run them at shorter periods of time, which would allow a much quicker turnaround for the NHS to give updates in technology as technology moves forward at a faster pace?
That's a really good question. To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know where the 4 years come from, but that's a really good question.
Fair enough, and I think in a fast-moving technology world, we'll have to look at that sort of thing, because we don't very rarely do people just have a technology device and keep on it for 4 or 5 years nowadays. People move on, it upgrades, and that's the way it works. So I will take one question, okay, we'll take all of you, since we'll take the 3, and then we'll do. We've got one in the back, and then yourself, and then you. Yeah.
So thank you very much for all your presentations and for the insights that you've shared. I've got 2 specific questions, one for Partha actually, but I'm going to start with you 4 at the beginning. I've had diabetes for 27 years. My son got diagnosed 18 months ago. He's on a Medtronic 640 with a Guardian Link 3. It was at that point that I decided to be quite forensic about looking at the technology. I work in service design and product design, so a lot of the points that are being aired at the moment with regards to frustration and product design I can now relate with. The question I have is with regards to your businesses. Obviously, there's a lot of data out there, and as thinking about this as a user of your products, there's a lot of data that we're not able to integrate in order to be able to make better decisions. So I'm quite surprised that doesn't appear to be by company, an open API strategy, apart from obviously your good selves. And I'm just thinking, where are you going? And is there kind of any business redesign that you can think of to help bring more data in so we make better decisions? The other aspect, obviously, on the 4 years, again, CCGs and that contract that you have, you're kind of stuck with something when the technology goes beyond that. I admire the work that you're doing and the NHS is doing, but I just wonder, how do the CCGs need to be brought into line? Because depending on where you are in the country, if it's either for Flash, Libra, and so on and others, it's a lottery, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'll answer my bit, and then I'll let you answer the other bits. So my bit, yes, you're right, and the Libra exercise has taught us one thing. Unfortunately, we need to sometimes do a mandate to make things happen and spread with a bit more consistency. So the Diabetes Technology Network, which is led by Pratik, Emma, Alistair, they've been tasked very clearly because we want to go to one system for the whole country as far as procurement goes. And that sort of ties in with looping and everything else, right? There's no point in saying there's about 6 options to loop, and then you only have one device available on the local formulary. So what we want to do is, and the idea is you have all the pumps, and when I say all, I mean all of them, you know, and I include Dana, Kaleido, Medtronic, and Tandem, whatever, Insulet, everything. Same for CGM, right? So we want everything to be included everywhere, have one pathway throughout the country, and then let the local people decide which they want to loop with. That's up to them. That's the clinical decision. That's the patient decision. So we are going there, and that's clearly they've been tasked to do it. They will be working with industry very shortly, and that's the plan. So hopefully, fingers crossed, he says this is the NHS after all, 2021, we would like to go for a national pathway procurement. So that's the plan, best laid plans and all that. Next, up to you guys for the second part of the question, not the first part.
Just a little bit about your comment about data and having more availability. And unfortunately, can't talk much about our future products coming to light, but it's definitely something that are being looked at as how we can use this data better and how we can actually make it more accessible to patients, and you know how we can integrate this with phones and kind of those kind of things. It is definitely something that is on the mark or on the scope for us, and something Medtronic is working very hard at. But obviously, can't really reveal too much of what's coming. So.
Okay, right. Next question here. Oh, do you want to say something? Yeah. Go for it. Go for it.
Two things to your question. The first one is about the data, and obviously, actually, with the data we have, we can do way more than what we do today, and especially when you start doing data scientist analysis on it, you can detect just with the insulin, you know, the insulin delivery and the glucose and the reactivity and the aggressiveness. We can actually detect things and prove things that everybody thought about. So for example, one of the things we are integrating is the fact that, and in our auto learning system, is the fact that during the week you are more active, and therefore your body will react differently to the insulin than during weekends. And the system can detect that. And how we've discovered that is obviously by looking at the actual data we have. And there are other things that, of course, as the charming lady on my left said, that we will be implementing very shortly that we can't disclose, but there are way more things that everybody around here feel that happens, and actually we can prove that it happens. The second question you're asking is additional data to the actual algorithm, which is the second question you were asking. And yes, of course, on that we're working. The only constraint we have is that we are all medical device and we're a regulated medical device. Therefore, the information that needs to go into the system needs to be provided by the system that is also a medical device. And so, for example, we can't use a Fitbit I'm sorry, you know, and you know, when I do my
algorithm, I need to be sure that what comes in, as I can't remember who said that, but trash in, trash out. You know, I need to get you know, data for heartbeat, for movement, for temperature. I need to get data that is medical device proven, so that I can include that in my system. So, but said that, we're working on that.
Okay, right. I just remembered you're French. That was so smoothly done. Charming lady to my left. That was very good, very good, very good. There's something to learn there, right. Okay, so 3 more questions, very short, sharp. So try and get some answers short if we can, please.
Specifically for the companies that are creating a separate controller, what kind of pricing model would we be looking at that would either allow the NHS to offer to those of us who are already looping and therefore wouldn't meet criteria for lack of stability, or for those of us who would have to self-fund?
Up to the companies, really. I mean, we are open, so as far as I'm concerned, so probably not quite answering your question as to people who are already on the looping, okay? So there's been this big debate we did with Libra, right? Who are already on it, they're already doing good, so what do we do with them now? And people have found a way to sort of fund it, because we have sort of made the assumption if you're self-funding and it's already improved thing, that makes you qualify. We could do the same thing. As far as what funding model comes in, so one of the things we are put on the plate is, does industry genuinely want to look at outcome-based payments? So TIR, pay you on the TIR. If you share your data, we'll know what the TIR is, put your money where your mouth is. If it's that good, we'll find out, we'll pay you for it. If it's not that good, we won't pay you for it. So is there and I'm saying that sort of in general, but that's something which is definitely under the discussion. So we just need to set all the things in play first. And I think we need to, as I said, to get the procurement right, to make sure we got all the pumps, and then we go to that. But that's definitely on the anvil. That's what I would say. Okay? 1, 2.
It's really good to hear the work that's being done to ensure that pumps and CGM, FGM is available for everyone the same across the country.
I can feel a butt.
But
I knew it.
Currently, insulin is based on local formularies. And as fast and newer, faster insulin comes online, what work is there to make sure that there's consistency? Because at the moment, in my area, I'm going to need to get pregnant to get FIASP.
How's that working?
It's proving quite hard. So how can we ensure that we've got equitable access to insulin, and that's not postcode lottery as well?
Yeah, so I'll answer that very quickly. That's a realization all across the NHS. This is not just insulin, right? There's a lot of postcode lottery. So that's why these organizations called RMOCs have been set up. Right? They're very much in their formative stages, and their view is that we'll create one policy and everybody agrees to it. As I learned from the Libra experience, that's not quite how it plays out, right? People then, and there's 190, and I think from my point of view, it creates variation. When you have got so many cooks involved, it creates variation. So we do need to do a national thing. What I would encourage you all to do is, there's a big report coming out on March 17th, if timing goes to play, which is the Getting It Right First Time. It talks about variation, talks about optimization of medicine, some of the plans we're putting across. They're quite ambitious, but it's fully recognized. And we know that the issue of variation is based on CCGs doing their own thing, clinicians doing their own thing. There's lots of variation, and we are aware of that. So it's easier to get your CCGs on board rather than your clinical colleagues. So that takes gentler persuasion. Right, okay. Last question, if I may.
Yeah, my last was, this tech is great, but it's about how we attach it to our body. And I have issues, for example, with the Libra and the glues that it uses. Basically giving like third-degree burns, and it's been known it's the isobol acrylate that's causing all the problems. Do you know there's any plans to get that removed from the adhesives?
So that's the that's where the MHRA comes in. So that's where they look at safety of devices, etc. It has been flagged to the company. The company are working with the MHRA. That's all I can tell you. But I'll give you an example locally. For people who have got that sort of level of burn and they can't have the Libra, we have an agreement that they go to a DEX. So it's quite straightforward for us. So we have had that agreement that they have another device to move on to. Not necessarily, not all of them. So we have got patients who basically then move on without the problems. So yes, we're aware of that, but I think that's not the policy role. That's where the MHRA comes in, and the MHRA was the one who flagged it with all the names you said. So aware of that, that's all we can say, and that's where they deal with the regulatory side.
And at ATTD, there was a couple of presentations from people who were offering different glues to industry that don't contain the components that cause contact dermatitis and these issues. So there are things happening in the industry. It may not be very clear to us at the sort of patient level that we're seeing them, but there definitely are conversations going on, and there are people producing new glues that aim to alleviate some of these symptoms.
Sorry, that was just a quick follow-up on how do we make it happen in terms of moving on to Dexcom? Is that something which we would contact CCG or?
Need to talk to your local clinicians. I mean, so I think before I go to the end, because I'm quite conscious of time, so I'll give you this final bit. So our job in NHS England, we're not the school headmaster. We can't tell every single adult person what to do. Some of it, clinicians at local level need to do what's the right thing, okay? And there are very good examples of clinicians doing that. The question is, how do you bring that up to the level? We can guide, we can shape, we can nudge, we can persuade. So I give you the example of what we do locally. I know lots of places who do exactly what I've said. I know lots of places who don't. And I think this is where you all come into play, is to have that conversation with a clinician. Why not? If they're doing it, what about us? You have to do that. And I think that's what I keep on saying whenever I do these sessions. Please speak out. We will back you up. I have no problem backing you. Those of you who know me, I've taken on individual cases. I will back you up. But you can absolutely copy me in, refer me in. I get that about 5 or 10 every day. Not a problem. If it's a valid question you're asking, we'll back you up. If, on the other hand, you copy me into emails which says, why does my hospital not have a PlayStation in the waiting room? I cannot help you with that. And I've got that email too. Right. Shall we move on to... Sorry. Ben?
Yeah, I'll just say a number of people have raised that it is quite warm in here. Yeah, it is. It's controlled by front desk. I'm going to see them in 5 minutes. Hopefully for the afternoon session we can do a bit cooler.
Okay, so shall we get the industry lightning pitches? Shall we start with, who wants to go first? Abbott? Abbott, are you here? Yes.
So if you'd all like to come up in a line down the front,
Yeah.
I'll give you a microphone, you've got a minute to go from there.
Yeah.
You're doing a stopwatch, Mark?
I'm doing the stopwatch. And they know what's happening. Go over a minute, free take, available to the NHS.
Here you go. 1 minute, one microphone, take the stage.
I hate being A. Hi, my name's Nikki. I'm here with my colleague Fabienne, who is also half French, so we have 2 in the room. We're here, of course, to talk about Freestyle Libre. We have over 2 million people using Freestyle Libre worldwide, 46 countries. And we also have a huge body of evidence coming through in terms of real positive health outcomes for people with diabetes. Last week we were at ATTD, where we had new evidence coming through, real-world evidence from US, Sweden, Canada, and actually what we're being able to demonstrate now is lower hyperglycemia rates, lower HbA1c, better time in range. We have the local evidence in terms of ABCD, which was demonstrated last year, 6 months, 1,300 patients. And actually, in the next couple of weeks, ABCD will also be doing their latest audit findings at Diabetes UK. So watch this space. We'd love to see you today. And thank you very much for having us.
Brilliant. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. 1 minute 05. 105. Right. Dexcom, next up. Right then, sir. Shall we?
Thanks,
You're on.
Hi. Okay. 60 seconds on Dexcom. So, if yeah, I'm letting some of it go.
50.
If you're like me, and you know, 0 finger pricks, advanced warnings of hypoglycemia, and interoperability of devices both now and in the future are, you know, kind of important to you, then you know you may want to consider Dexcom if you're not already wearing one. G6 is approved for use by the regulatory authorities that you don't need a finger prick with that. And from an alarm perspective, you know, we can not only tell the user when you are having a hypo, but we can give you a 20-minute warning ahead of serious hypos as well, with a feature called Urgent Low Glucose Soon. And then G6 is the only CGM in the ICGM interoperability category. And so I think what you've seen from some of the other industries are that, or industry companies are that, you know, these insulin delivery devices are making decisions using G6 as a product. So we'd love to see you at the stand in the break, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gluco or Diascend or one company?
Hey there, so my name's Matt. I'm, as Partha said, I'm from Gluco, so we're here exhibiting Diascend today. You may be familiar with the platform. It's used by over 94% of the secondary care diabetes clinics around the UK. What we basically do is we work with manufacturers across the industry, whether it be from blood glucose to insulin pumps, CGM, or even smart insulin pens, which are on their way. And we bring all that data into a usable format for both clinicians and for patients. We allow you to view data from a whole range of different devices, different manufacturers, in a way that provides more, I suppose, better insights for patients and for clinicians, and allows you to really kind of take control of that data. I know there's a question about the availability of data, so we're actively working with companies to basically expand the amount of devices that you can use on the platform and the better insights that you can get from those. So as technology moves on with looping and whatnot, we're moving with that and basically having better representations of the data for both you and your care teams as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next up, Ipsamed. No, don't want it? Don't want the slot? Not that keen? Okay. Insulet.
They're all hiding outside.
They're hiding outside. Advanced Therapeutics.
So Ipsamed.
Ipsamed? Ipsamed.
Oh, yes.
Right, you have a minute to tell us all about your good selves.
Oh, on the stage? Yeah, sure.
So you're being broadcast to the world as well.
Oh, wow.
Hi everyone, hi, very warm in here.
Yes.
So I'm Sharon, this is Sophie, we're from Ipsamed Limited, and we're here to show you the Ipsa pump. Ipsamed have been in the diabetes field for over 36 years, and we have our new Ipsa pump out here, the pump that allows you to decide your therapy, your lifestyle, and it's also fit for the future as well.
So this is the pump, as it's small, lightweight, it's a touchscreen pump, it's very intuitive, it's language neutral as it's all icon based, as you can see here. It takes a pre-filled insulin cartridge, and if you'd like to hear more about it, then come and see us on the stand.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you, thank you.
Just to add from a DIY perspective, their insulin cartridges fit an Insight pump, so if you want to use something other than Novo Rapid, you could always get their cartridges and put Fiasp or Lispro into it.
That was said by Tim, not the company. Insulet, you have a minute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jitesh. I work for Insulet, and my job is to introduce the Omnipod Dash system to you. This is what it looks like. It's a new handset which was released in December last year. It's produced by Insulet, and it's the third generation Omnipod system. It's completely tubeless. It holds 200 units of insulin, waterproof, up to an hour underwater. It's also, we're linking up to Dexcom in the future very soon, and also it has a zero basal rate on it, IC ratios of fractional 0.1. And yeah, we're all training the London teams just now, so we'll be up to speed by the end of this month, so most of your centres will be able to have it. Guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, Advanced Therapeutics. Do we have them? Yes, we do. Sir, you have a minute.
Hi, everyone. My name's John Hughes. I own a company called Advanced Therapeutics, and we're the current distributors for the Dana range of pumps in the UK. Sewell are the manufacturer. Interesting company in that it's run by and owned by a consultant diabetologist. There you go, Partha. There's a bit there. And who made his first pump in 1979. The current pump we have is the RS, which was designed for use in interoperable closed-loop systems. And we have the first closed-loop program coming available hopefully in the next couple of months through Cambridge. And I believe we have a collaboration with Diaboloop going ahead as well. So come and see us at the stand. We're conveniently located by a coffee point. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it's Time for lunch, so we'll take a break and come back at 12:15, if that's okay. Just one final thing to say to everybody. So I will have to take my leave, if that's okay. Not for any reason that I have to go, but my parents are visiting, and they're here for their 50th wedding anniversary. I have to go. I've had to really explain why I'm here. So I wish you all the very, very best for the rest of the day, and hopefully we carry this on next year. And as I said, we are trying our bits, but we need your help as we go along, because we'll get things wrong. So please guide us accordingly in the policy role and tell us what's not going right. But we are very keen to work with all of these people and yourselves to make sure looping does happen in the NHS sooner rather than later. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
That entity off mute.
Okay, so then if you do this...
And where shall I... Okay.
So mute it for now. And then... Right then, everybody. Thanks for coming back into the room, and we are ready to kick off this afternoon's session. We know it's a bit warm in here, but we're going to leave the doors open this afternoon. We've got the windows open. Hopefully that means it won't get quite so steamy. And of course, after Sufyan's finished talking, we're going to be able to move around a little bit to get some of that air circulating. So hopefully it'll be a bit more comfortable. Just as to come back to a sort of a point of order, this afternoon we've got this first session on lessons from the clinic and real-world experience, which will then be followed by the workshop streams. As we go into the workshop streams, they're on the slides that come up to show you them. It will tell you which rooms they are in, so you can choose the appropriate room. We will point those out to you as we get to that point. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but that's not too big an issue, as we've got quite a bit of space at the end to cover off any gaps that come into play. I'll tell everybody now, just so you are aware, there's not going to be a slide for this. There is always, after these events, a well-respected tradition of heading to a local pub for a few drinks, if only because I'm really thirsty by that point. So we will be doing the same thing again today. That will be the Punch Tavern on Fleet Street. Those who came last year will remember it from then. And the very last slide we put up has a map and how you get there. So without further ado, we will now move on to this plenary session for this afternoon, which has just gone dead on me. There we go. We have a presentation from Sufyan Hussain, a consultant at Guy's and St Thomas's and other hospitals in London, who's going to talk about lessons from the clinic and real-world experience.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. Thanks everyone. My name is Sufyan Hussain. As you've heard, I'm a diabetologist at Guy's and St Thomas's and honorary senior clinical lecturer at King's College London. And I am really excited to be here because it's a brilliant forum. I'm really sorry I couldn't join this morning because I'm on call for general medicine today, and I'm hoping I won't get called while I'm talking to you right now. If I am, I've already had a few conversations. Yeah, there you go. We've got a doctor in the house who can take it. So I'm sorry I couldn't be here. But for me, this is a really important forum. As someone who's lived with type 1 diabetes myself for almost 30 years, anything to do with trying to empower us and improving in our lives is really important. So I'm really grateful for the session and the opportunity to come and talk to you all over here. So these are my disclosures. I've done educational work for other companies, but I will reiterate the slides and views expressed are my own, and in fact are not related to the organizations I'm linked with, because I'll be talking about open source systems, DIY systems as well. In fact, that's going to be my main thrust of today's conversation, given that you've already had a talk about the commercial systems of the offering, but really talking about the clinical experience and how, from a healthcare professional perspective, using it in clinic, what are approaches and things that, for you, approaches that might be important. But I'll be starting off with a summary, telling you about my link with technology, what we're doing with tech in clinic, or what's happening in the real world in the NHS, looping, commercial, a little bit about the commercial and open source, comparing the two, and the clinical experiences from open source or open source DIY systems. Now, you'll see lots of differences in terminology. There's the wonderful catchphrase of artificial pancreas. There's automated insulin delivery systems that initially got abbreviated to AIDS, which luckily we've managed to get away from, like FGM and flash glucose monitoring. So we're hoping that won't be the case for the years to come. There's also hybrid closed loop or looping. The term I prefer, and I'll tell you why, is automated insulin delivery systems. And that's just more from a healthcare professional perspective, because it makes you understand that there's an algorithm or a code behind it, and it's a system at the end of the day. It's not as clever as a real pancreas. I spent most of my research doing in vivo physiology, so that's working and understanding how the body works, the pancreas works, and the pancreas is a very clever system. So that is just a warning for us to know that we have to understand how the system works, work with it to get the right outcomes. It's not going to be apply it on and a quick fix. So that's why I prefer that term, automated insulin delivery systems. I think you've had some bits on algorithms this morning. So I'll tell you a bit about my link with technology and looping. So I was diagnosed almost 30 years ago. I was at that time growing up in a city called Karachi in Pakistan, just by the coast. Anyone been there? Oh, gosh. Great city, 25 million, possibly 30 million, who knows, people in that city. It's obviously a lot of poverty as well. I was lucky. I was one of the privileged few who could afford insulin. For the first few weeks, it relied boiling your needles. For the first few months, it relied my mum, who's luckily a doctor, to take blood, with my brother being the tourniquet, and running it off to a lab, finding out the glucose result the next day. So, you know, that was where Advanced came in with the glucometer. Anyone remember that, James? Hey, there you go. Yeah, and you know, it took about 2 minutes. You had to dab it. They were a bit big and bulky, weren't they? But luckily, I didn't have to carry them around because I only had 50 strips for the whole year. So I didn't need to take it anywhere with me. So that was actually quite, well, anyway. So as time went on, I moved to the UK when I was about 16, and obviously things progressed. I had pens. I was still on twice-daily insulin, and I went to university in a place called Cambridge, which is a little bit tricky and challenging, because obviously there are lots going on course-wise, trying to do other things like rowing, and David, we were in the same college. Yep. Yeah, brilliant. He was in the year above me. Brilliant. So it was around that time when things went a bit pear-shaped, and I was in the States speaking to a diabetologist who told me about an insulin pump and said, well, there's someone called Stephanie Amiel. She's moved from the States, from Yale. Probably go and see her. And I did. My own diabetologist wasn't particularly supportive because they had, you know, he's a lovely guy, but not very well versed in type 1. And the UK, even though it was a pioneer in pumps, unfortunately had a few adverse incidents which created a little bit of barriers. This is going back to the 80s and 90s. But technology had moved on to the States, and I was really lucky that Stephanie Amiel took me on board, helped me through this, and I was also lucky because this was the time when you had to self-fund these things. So I had a very supportive charity at Cambridge who helped part-fund some of this, and then obviously I had parents who supported as well through that journey, and then eventually when the NICE guidance came in, managed to get funding for it. But equally, starting off on a pump back then was pretty tough, because you only had a 2-hour session. I was probably one of 50 people in the UK. Yes, you know, I went I had the telephone numbers for diabetes nurses, but I was an 18-year-old boy. I don't call my parents much. Why would I call the diabetes nurse? You didn't have online information, so you kind of work things yourself. And I was very lucky that I went to a place called the Joslin Diabetes Centre as a research fellow in the summer, and I picked up lots of tricks about how to use pumps, and that learning was priceless. It really helped me through my training, dealing with life, London living, 3 kids, night shifts, consultant life, all of that came about. So I'm really, really grateful that I went through that learning journey almost 21 years ago, and it paid dividends. CGM, some of you have been on it for a while already, and much longer than I have. I didn't have the greatest experience in the mid-2000s because they were pretty clunky. They didn't work. You put them in, they didn't give you a number, they gave you a number, you weren't sure of the number. So it was probably about 2012 that they had a deal on, and I actually invested in just having 5 sensors, which I use very preciously at specific times to get some understanding and idea behind it. And then, this is in the clinic, I do get asked a lot, do you loop? Do you loop, Sufyan? I'm not going to give you an answer. I'll leave you to work that out. But what I will say is that I do make an effort to try different forms of technologies and different forms of treatments that you all go through. So in clinic, I can be of value to you, to know what to do practically. So I do that. I don't, unfortunately, maintain as good a blog as Tim does. And there's some things that I can't do, like getting pregnant. So, but I try and get my head around things to help others. So of course, there's someone in clinic who brought this up, and I'm fairly reflective in how I do things. So looking back at my reflections, these were my thoughts. I'd spent, good large chunk of my time training, a PhD, been to big institutions, lived with type 1, and here I am trying to work out how on earth this is working and how clever and sophisticated it is. So those are my thoughts. What is this? And the next question wasn't helped by the fact that we had Partha, who was promoting this with his flowing hair and his Bollywood sunglasses and his Batman t-shirt. So the next thing in my mind was, is this a cult? Okay, what do I do in clinic? What does the team do? Who do I ask? Who should be using this and who shouldn't? Do we support this? How do we support this? Who is accountable for it? So all those thoughts went in my head. And of course, it's been a learning journey for the last 2-3 years, becoming much more well-versed with the whole topic, writing on it, working with international groups on it, helping support other health professionals how to learn about it, and dealing with some of the challenges that I'll mention. But actually, a key point came in 2019 when, as I mentioned, I like to try different systems. And in our clinic, we were supporting a pump called the Dana RS pump. So I looked at the company and said, well, look, if people in my clinic are going to be using it, I want to know how to use it. So they were very supportive. They gave a Dana RS pump. And I was speaking to the research lead for, the research director for Dexcom. And I happened to ask very naive questions about how to wear it. And he looked at me and said, Sufyan, surely you've worn a G6? And I was like, well, no. I've got 3 kids, I work for the NHS and hard out, London living. So he took my address and sent me a packet of these. So I had a Dana RS pump, a G6, and I happened to use an Android phone. So there we go. That was, a little bit of an insight into what can happen, but equally, it gave a very good understanding. And I would say that certainly the amount I've learned from people who've been doing artificial pancreas systems has been phenomenal in understanding not just this bit, this is the clever techie bit, but also how to apply insulin in the clinic setting, even on injections, even on pumps, to activities, whether it's pregnancy, whether it's intensive exercise. It's really helped my understanding of how insulin and glucose shifts work. So it's been a very interesting learning journey. And I would say most people who loop, some in this room might say yes or no, have actually learned a phenomenal amount by undertaking that journey and learning from it. Don't know if that's correct or not. You can disagree afterwards. So that's kind of the starter of this talk, just to give you a perspective of my link with tech. Onto the main course, just more realistic data of the real world. This is type 1 diabetes current data. Partha and I will be picking up on some aspects to it, but adults, type 1 diabetes, we need to be doing a lot better. Only 30% of adults with type 1 diabetes are managing a conservative target of an HbA1c of 7.5% or less nationally. And the big challenge is, not just that we're not doing as well as some other countries, such as US or Germany, but also there's huge variation. And I'm sure most of you have experienced that at some stage in your care. And I wouldn't call it a postcode lottery. It's actually very predictable variation. If you come to me, I can tell you which centres, or I'm sure, again, others can tell you which centres might be doing things differently. And so it's predictable variation year on year and something that we need to try and help improve. Access to technology, pumps. So obviously this graph shows the percentage of people who are on pumps. As you go down this curve, it becomes less, and that's where we are as a United Kingdom. So there's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's not just funding, because funding gets thrown across. It's also empowering people with type 1 diabetes. I'm sorry, those bits are covered, but access to specialist type 1 diabetes healthcare professionals. Capacity is being outstripped. Skills, how do you teach people to use technology as well? And that's a big challenge for us right now for the NHS workforce planning. Even if we had all the money in the world, where are we going to get the nurses, the doctors who understand and have the proficiency for type 1 care? So those are some of the challenges on a bigger scale. But of course, technology has its place to improve the situation and also reduce the burden for you as well as healthcare professionals. But the way we fund it is very binary. And I'm sure most of you know a little bit about funding, I'm hoping, or you will have an afternoon session as well. But certainly, one of the criteria for pumps, HbA1c greater than 8.5%, despite optimal care, is a very binary way of looking at it. So I put this out. This is about 2-3 years ago, to a group of commissioners and stakeholders, diabetologists, primary care physicians, 58 responses saying, what is the purpose of a diabetes management device? Is it to lower HbA1c? Is it to prevent hypos? Is it both? Because that's actually how we're commissioning at the moment. Is it spending more time in range, which is becoming a new entity? Is it making living with diabetes safer and easier? This I put out in the beginning, after giving a little bit of talk about technology, and here were the responses. And you can see that, and my sort of battle to them was, if this is how we're thinking about technology, why are we commissioning it differently, which is 1 and 2. So that's, a little bit of a snippet on the challenge in front of us and where my perspectives are. Funding is clearly important, and I'm not going to go into it because it's so detailed, but you will be having a session later. But also there's very helpful information on JDRF. But just to mention that in the NHS, the funding cycle for your pumps is limited to 4 years. So that will create a little bit of a barrier in terms of going onto a pump with a commercially approved automated insulin delivery system, or equally if there's a different pump you want. So that's something that, conversation we often get caught up in clinic with, so hence why I just put it out there. The NICE Type 1 guidance is currently being revised. We're hoping things will change. We don't know yet. We haven't seen that happen in the last 10, 15 years. We're hoping this time around people will wake up to the evidence that's very strong in there. And it's more than just funding, because JDRF have done a very good booklet on pathway to choice. Maureen was there to launch it in Parliament, and it's a good read if you haven't read it already. How are we doing for time, Tim? Okay, good. So a little bit about, this is probably the only heavy graph, unfortunately. I'm just going to have one and maybe one later, but that's about it. But this is just about, does technology improve outcomes? We all know that, but sometimes we have to prove that point to others. This is data from the United States registry. Okay, there are insured, people who are insured, so a different demographic, but you can clearly see as you apply CGM, certainly, things improve. Doesn't matter which form of insulin delivery you give, but certainly if you do give pumps, you can get the improvements possibly more as compared to MDI. And it doesn't matter which age group you're looking at, and that's just crudely looking at HbA1c, not hypos, because obviously if you bring that into the equation, the conversation gets a lot more detailed and broader. But the one sad statistic is that despite the increasing use of technology, and CGM certainly, between 2010 to 12 to 2016 to 18, there hasn't been much of a shift in HbA1c. Why is that? Of course, lots of things, education, learning, training from the healthcare professionals to make best use of it. But equally, another big aspect, which comes onto the automated side, is the challenge of living with type 1 diabetes. Those of you who care for it, or those of you who live with it, clearly know this. 24/7, day in, day out, having to make complex decisions whilst living your life, whilst doing shift work, picking your kids up from school, whilst working late in the evenings, eating different things, different activities, it becomes hard to do it again and again and again. And that's where the whole idea comes from automated diabetes, where you've got a system in place to make this, just help you make these decisions and make it easier for you and relieve you of that burden. So that's just a pretext to it. Does it work? I will show you that in a second. But of course, you've had a talk about commercial systems and open source systems. I'll spend a little bit of time discussing the differences between the two from my perspective as a healthcare professional, and we can always talk about it later if there are any questions. Commercial systems, at the moment, we've still only got the 670G. The other ones are coming in place. You've heard about the Tandem Control IQ system, the Loops offering, and the Cambridge system linking with Dana and the G6. Most of them we're seeing come with an onboarding program, so some form of training for someone who's naive to using these systems to make them learn and put in the settings, which are often very simple settings to plug in. Some of them it's only total daily dose of insulin and weight, so it becomes much easier to get started. You've got a healthcare professional training and support available, customer support, if you want someone to scream at, you can call. Less variables and simple. You can't really adapt a lot, which can be annoying for some, but equally it's fairly simple to use. The algorithms for some are adaptive in that they improve over time, so you're not having to constantly look at your data and adapt things, but of course, it's an algorithm. It's the way it's coded. It may not be the truth, but it certainly has an approach towards doing it. Non-smartphone based option, I put that as an advantage for some because some people prefer that. I certainly don't like using my phone in front of my kids when we're eating on the table, for example, and some may want that as well. So it's choice, I guess, at the end of the day, that they come with non-smartphone based options, and some people might prefer that. Disadvantages. There's an additional cost for some of the algorithms. We know that the Cambridge system, for example, will be £70 a month. For those who are self-funding, for those via an NHS pathway, it might be free. The limitations in pump and CGM options that you've probably heard about this morning, they may require a new pump, and that requires, obviously, financial undertaking, and requires real-time CGM as opposed to DIY CGM off-label use, which I'll mention very briefly. Less adaptive variables, you can't change things much, but there are, I guess, a few things you can tweak only. It's not available approved in every area. And the final point I forgot to put in is alarms, which is obviously one of the things that gets highlighted a lot because these are systems, they're commercial systems that have to have alarms in place to warn you of things that might be going wrong. But that can be annoying for some, particularly at night time and particularly at other situations if it's alarming too much. The open source systems, you'll have more sessions on it, but very briefly, various pump and CGM options keeps changing. I'm sure this slide is already out of date. Low acquisition running costs, which this is what I see when people are going onto it and choosing between the systems because they may have a pump that can already work with it. They are funded for Libre and using DIY CGM with Meow Meow, or off-label CGM, which means extending the use of their CGM, which is a very common thing that's been happening for years. Older pumps, the algorithm is free, you've got very responsive community support, and for the situation you might be in, that might give you a lot more support in terms of your endurance runner or marathon runner, and you want to be in touch with somebody who's used that system. It actually might work out that you might find someone who's done it that way. Continuous updates and better interoperability, just because obviously it's open source. But there's a more complex technical setup, and that can be a challenge for a lot of people in undertaking it and trying to do it. And the onboarding requires yourself to be doing it. So for Android APS, there's certain levels of objectives that take you through that. But for the loop, obviously you have to learn it up and get support from others or be well versed in the reading to understand what to input as your variables. Limited healthcare professional support, and for some, obviously the Open APS, I don't know if you mentioned that already, you've got something called AutoTune that can adapt the variables over time, but for others, the Loop and Android APS, it relies you on looking at the data and refining things. With Android APS, you can use AutoTune. Is that correct, Tim? Yeah. So obviously you can use AutoTune, but otherwise you're really reliant on yourself looking at the data, and that's a habit that you have to develop. Okay, so those are some of the difference between the two. You will have opportunity to questions hopefully at the end, but just to mention, do these work? I teamed up with Pete Jennings, that's him, that's what he wears to work every day at Derby. We did a review and looked at about 24 publications, lots of poster presentations on data, mostly self-reporting outcomes, but actually the benefits were all very clear. Increased time in range, reduced glucose variability, reduced hypos, less reliance on the accuracy of carb counting. So if you get things wrong, it will get you back in range later. Improved overnight control, but the biggest of all is the reduction in mental burden, the reduction in workload that comes with using an automated system. You have a night's sleep without having to wake up and tweak things, or equally during the day, things are a lot more easier. What's been our clinical experience? I've been lucky to work in a service that's been very supportive of people with DIY APS, and of course I've developed very strong experience in this and helped quite a few in quite a number of situations. But we've seen, learned a lot from using these systems in a range of situations, including endurance training, intensive exercise, pregnancy. I'm not a pediatrician, but equally I get contacted by people who've got kids and getting advice, people on steroid treatment, surgery, as well as fasting. So that's a paper we wrote. That's an infant with 2 pouches in the nappy, one which is housing a Medtronic pump, and the other which is housing the Edison computer with the Open APS algorithm. That's an AGP graph. If you can see, the fine, narrow, in range, which is a new terminology they're using, FNIR for AGP, is in the day, but the night is different. What might be happening? Anyone awake? 30-day period. So this is actually an example of fasting. which we're hoping to write up fairly soon. And that's been blurred, unfortunately, by my video, but that's an example in pregnancy. And these are, okay, they are exceptional examples of excellent outcomes that can be achieved. It doesn't mean necessarily that this will happen to you. It just means that it can be done, but it does require learning and correct usage. But our experience so far has been very positive on this. So I put this here just to understand, because obviously one of the things we get asked a lot is, well, I want to start looping, what next? But there are, from looking after a lot of people who've been looping, you realize it's a journey. It shows you, unfortunately, the number of barriers and number of steps you've got to take to get to that journey, because you guys over here are probably 1% of the people I look after. I've got a whole very diverse range, from people who struggle to even maintain 1 injection a day. So it's a journey, but it's a learning journey. It's an understanding journey that starts with how to use the insulin, how to carbohydrate count, testing sugars, using the pumps with the right settings, using CGM, not just for the now, but also reviewing your data, managing special situations for you. That might be exercise, for example. Sugar surfing, so how do you use the CGM data to get good sort of outcomes, and reviewing your data to make the tweaks. And almost, I would say, a lot of people who've done really well have had that sort of journey before they've gone on to looping. And that's something important to bear in mind if you are thinking about it, to think, which area do I need to spend and focus on before I start? Because obviously if you want good outcomes, it may still help without those things, but of course you won't be getting the best or the best utility of the system without undertaking those steps. I think there's a very important role for healthcare professional support in this, and I think it's something that we need to do better at, but of course you've got the community support, as mentioned already. Common pitfalls, before we finish, bear in mind, it's a coded system, as I mentioned. It's not a pancreas. It relies on correct settings of your variables, manual input, adjustments. DOI doesn't mean doing it alone. And you're all here, so obviously, hopefully, if anyone goes on that journey, you'll have each other to support with. But equally, I would say healthcare professional support is key. It's certainly in my service, I want to know if anyone is thinking about looping, not because I want to parent it, I want to control it, but actually I want to be there to support you if you needed advice or help. We had someone on Monday who came and saw a nurse and told them they were going to start looping that day. The nurse panicked and came to me, and I said, oh, well, just tell them to wait. I'll see them once I've finished with the person I was seeing. 15 minutes later, turned up, no one was there. Okay. We gave a bit more time, no one was there. Tried calling about 7 times, couldn't get through, finally got through. I think he was just a bit scared about what the perception might be. And I was just there to say, look, we just wanted to say, we're here to support you in the journey. It's your choice at the end of the day. And just wanted to, in a sense, check and make sure he understood what he was doing and how he was doing it. And certainly one thing I do try and insist on is getting Night Scout URLs, or some way, if you're using Typepool, that's fine too, so that we can actually help you with your data with more ease, and it'll be helpful for us to see how the outcomes are going. So I encourage you all to obviously make sure your healthcare professional is aware. If you're getting resistance, that's not a good thing. If you're getting the response going, oh, well, brilliant, well, you look after yourself, that might be also something you want to start questioning, because if things were not to play out correctly, or if your situation was to be different, if gastroparesis, issues with manual dexterity, visual issues, how will you get the support that you need? And it might be thinking about, where will I be able to get that from? Which healthcare professionals can help? And there are not many around yet, but we're hoping we'll be able to train others who can do this. Hypos, always use that as the first step to minimize. That's a common pitfall, because we are fueled by social media. We see that exceptional straight line, that great time and range, but trying to make sure that's the first step, to use the system as a hypo minimizer, and then you can build other things on. Again, open to questions, but I certainly try and advocate aiming for a time below range, less than 3%. So less than, that's blood glucose levels less than 4, aiming for less than 3% for most. Again, it will be fine-tuned depending on who you are. Lots of other things. I'm not going to have a chance to talk about this, but you'll be covered later on, from habits, perspective, learning and understanding and making realistic goals. The one thing I will say, there's still a very important role for your healthcare professional in reviews, in being that mirror, in guiding you or picking up on things that might be helpful to you. So do give that importance. A few more minutes and then yeah, is that all right? So finally, that one bit that I'll mention from clinic, is a little this is something that's, I guess, I'm beginning to see more and more of this, hence why I bring it up. Of course, as someone who lives with type 1 understand, we want to stay healthy and we want to avoid complications. And what I mean by complications, things that will complicate our life. Changes may occur, so background changes may occur. And most with type 1, maybe in this room, may have some of that, and that's okay, you can live with. But complications we want to avoid. And certainly the Swedish population registry looked at when things started to emerge in terms of complications, and this is looking at extensive eye disease, and the probability of that, well, actually, nothing much changes between, that's an HbA1c level of 6.5% to 7%, but it starts going off afterwards. Of course, if you bring your HbA1c down below 6.5%, certainly without a CGM, your risk of hypos go up. So their idea was that sweet spot for your HbA1c is between 6.5% to 7%. Why do I say this? Yeah. That's correct, yes. Yeah. So that's obviously very long-term data. So why do I put this out there? Sorry?
Not if you're 6. Not if you're a 6-year-old.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, they've got obviously longer data as well within that. Yeah. So it's a common question I get asked, actually a lot from parents as well, because there's naturally that drive to make sure that what you're doing for your child is the best thing possible. And the reason I mention this is because I see a lot of people who are now stressed or feeling very glum when they're seeing me in clinic with an HbA1c of 6.1% or 6.2%, because they're actually thinking their targets should need to be much lower. There's no evidence for that yet. What I will say, there is very good consensus on time in range coming to fruition, and even that is not achievable for majority of people with type 1 diabetes. This is modeled on an HbA1c of about 6.5% to 7%. And that even, as we know nationally, most people are not achieving it. So my advice is, for people with diabetes, it's not your target. Set personal goals. Most of you may find difficult to achieve. But certainly with an automated system, it's very achievable. But if you are doing better than this, the bit I will always ask, is it coming at the expense of mental burden, workload, hypos, or doing a very carb-free diet that's pushing your lipids up? Or is it coming by restricting aspects that you enjoy? For some people, it might mean not doing exercise because they notice things get rocky, so that time in range becomes harder to maintain. So why do I say this? It's really just to kind of put it out there and say, well, I see a lot of people feeling very negative about outcomes that they should feel very strongly and positive about and walk away feeling this is brilliant. And I think sometimes when our messages come out, whether it's on social media or other places, we need to just be a bit mindful of the impact it might be having. And for some, it might be great that they're able to achieve those targets without too much effort, but for a lot of people, it will require a lot of work. Lastly, I know, Tim, we're over time. I can touch on this later with questions. The legal position, regulation, is a topic I get asked about a lot from a healthcare professional's perspective, having been involved in the journey with Diabetes UK and other position statements. As a clinic, we can't validate these open source systems. We can support them. We can't bring them up in a consultation, but you can, and if you do, then we're allowed to talk about them. That's really the kind of message around it. For us, it's really important as healthcare professionals that we get our head around using these systems. For majority, it's like driving a car. For majority of people, you don't really need to care about what's going on in the bonnet. But when things go wrong, that's when it's required. And certainly as a healthcare professional, I need to be able to know and understand. So if I'm seeing people where things are not quite working out, I can help them through that journey. And that's where we've got courses. Alistair's involved in one, and later this in March in Nottingham. Other ones happening at King's, and other work going on. So, final slide, automated diabetes. Is the future? No, as you've heard and seen, it is the present. There's a lot of work going on nationally and internationally, and I'm very pleased to be also linked with the Open Project that's doing some very exciting research on this. For us, my main message is that our role is actually vital, and we need to do better and do more about understanding these systems so we can help you in your journey. I'd just like to thank my colleagues at Guy's and St Thomas's, the King's College Hospital, who've looked after me, colleagues at ABCD DTN, including Emma Wilmot, Peter Jennings, who helped me with the review article, and we're still working together. People involved in the DIY community, Alistair's here, Melissa's here, Tim's here, Kev's here, and Dana as well. We have a podcast coming soon with Dana in the next month or so. And the open team, the very capable Dr. Katrina Brown and the colleagues who've been involved and actually been very open to me also linking up, even though I'm not technically from the EU anymore. So thank you all. I'm sorry it took a bit longer than we hoped, but if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. I will be around as long as I don't get called away this afternoon as well. And if there's anyone from Guy's and St Thomas's who hasn't informed the health professional that they're looping or they're planning to loop, please come let me know. As I said, it's not to police, it's just to be aware and support you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. As a Guy's and St Thomas's patient here, they are very good in this area, and I do encourage you to go and have a chat with Sufi if they don't know about it already. But before we go into the workshops this afternoon, do we have any questions that anybody would like to ask? Looks like you did a great job of taking people through.
There's a few there.
Oh, hang on a
I'll
minute.
put them to sleep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So, as a paediatrician, our team want to offer more support, but the legal advice we're getting is very clear, and that is we are getting in a very difficult situation that if something goes wrong, we are going to be blamed. How do you go about this?
Quick answer, don't ask lawyers. I mean, you know, most things off-label we do in medicine. There's so many other things we do. If we were to go down the legal route, you know, we'd find ourselves in a tricky situation. I think this is really important for healthcare professionals to come together and actually draw consensus, which is part of the work that I'm involved in internationally, to draw consensus on patients, on the right selection, right approaches, to be able to offer this within the service, how you'd maintain a registry. So those things need to come together. There's a lot more that professional bodies should be doing. We have statements from Diabetes UK and JDRF, but of course they're not professional bodies. They're not healthcare professional bodies is what I'm trying to say over here, or societal bodies that need to come together. So yeah, I think the tricky situation is that if you go down to any regulator, any legal channel, on paper, this is not going to go down. You're not going to get the advice that you're hoping to get, which is how to support this. Certainly, you know, as long as you stick to the principles that have been put out in the consensus, my feeling is that should be the right, you know, it should hold you in clear waters. I think there's a lot of that we should do as professional bodies to also put forward and say, hey, we'll back each other up if you find yourself in a tricky situation. As long as you've gone about it the right way in your clinic and done the right things, you know, it's not lawyers at the end of the day who's going to question if something went wrong. There'll be other physicians or other paediatricians who'll be called in to give expert witness. So I think there needs to be a little bit more work that we can do as a society, professional society, that is. Yeah. Sorry about my question here earlier. Is that help or yeah, a little bit? Okay, we can talk about it later. Yeah.
It was an earlier on slide, which was a thing about the process that people needed to go through. And it wasn't the learning triangle one, but so in the bottom right-hand corner it said onboarding, and I just didn't know what that meant.
Oh, sorry about that. So it's I guess a new terminology about if you were getting onto a new system, there'd be some training that goes with it. So, for example, the Medtronic 670G system has an onboarding program, which means that you will come in. There's a 3-hour session. There's a learning package and learning material, which is online, that will help you in your journey to start off on the system, and that will be your sort of way of getting on board with that system. So with the DIY systems, of course, you've got Android APS that gets you through objectives, but you haven't got that package system coming from the healthcare professional or a company, for example, that offers you that sort of interactive process. Does that help to understand it? Okay. So.
Okay, just coming.
I wanted to pick up on the question from the back on paediatricians and obviously what the advice that you get back is, or pushback even. My question is about if the regulations that are possibly slowing down some of these new developments, some of the looping kind of technology to get to market, to the NHS, to everyone else. If that regulation is kind of slow in meeting the change in technology that kind of are bringing these solutions, and therefore if more needs to be looked at, and by no means I am absolutely advocating deregulation or even that way of thinking, but what can be done to kind of get that regulation up to a place, or up to a place that is meeting where technology is?
It's a very good question. Can't remember if is Joseph here still? Joseph Roberts? No, because I know he's involved in some of the work that's going on with Maureen Quigley, which is trying to understand. You know, it's actually a very philosophical question. You know, we have regulators to decide if something's safe and therefore regulated in a certain way, but whose decision is that? In this case, obviously people are using things that they're trusting themselves. Whose decision should it be? The big issue with that is what happens or who's accountable if things are going wrong. So going back to your question, is regulation holding back the pace of change? It is, you know, it will be stifling creativity. It will be stifling opportunity, but how do you get around that? There's still a very valid place for regulation. And I think you're right, it's that middle ground of how we meet, but certainly in this situation, there's some understanding that from the person who's also going down an open source or DIY route, that they're doing something that doesn't have regulation yet, so they are doing it at their own risk. It's no different from a situation where you may have trained somebody to carb count, but they actually want to do things differently. I mean, that's what happens in common reality. I mean, so it's similar in that execution. The problem, I guess, lies is, you know, how it relates to the accountability if things were to go wrong. For example, even wrong with a pump, how would the situation be perceived? Unfortunately, we haven't come across that situation yet. It's you know, it's a small print situation, but unfortunately, it does create a lot of barriers from a practical perspective. So I think it's a very complex question which we won't have a straightforward answer for, but there are ways around it that will at least help us to get things moving.
So, final question.
I hope this isn't a controversial question in the context of things saying type 1 tech, but for people living with type 2 diabetes who use multiple daily injections where remission and de-escalation are not kind of viable options, do you see things like looping playing a role in their care in the future?
Very interesting question. Yes, the short answer. But remember, not all forms of type 2 diabetes are equal. There's obviously a big variation with it. The challenge has been to try and, I mean, funding is a big challenge on this topic because 8% of adults have type 2 diabetes. So if you are going to open the doors of technology, then it does entail a cost. And the challenge has been trying to show that it offers a benefit. And it may be that, you know, going down the road of automated systems might be something for later, but the initial step of even trying to use CGM or flash glucose monitoring, or even using patch, you know, the very cheap patch pumps, disposable pumps, not Omnipod, but the other ones in the States like Vigo, for example. Even the challenge of showing that they can offer a benefit is something that hasn't been shown yet. So I think those initial steps will happen first. As time evolves, you'll probably see that certain groups within the type 2 diabetes sections may actually be safer and better off on a technological system, but that will take time.
I'd just like to add to that there are in the US a small number of people who have been using DIY systems with type 2. They're not a very large part of the population, so there's not really very much data in relation to that, but there are people who have taken it upon themselves to do that. Thank you very much for that enlightening session. So now we're going to go into the workshops. As you can see on the screen, we have 3 rooms available. If you are doing the Getting Started with Type 1 Tech, where to go and what to look at, that's in room 3, which is as you come out of this door here, straight in front of you. If you're going to bringing tech up in a clinic appointment, tips, tricks and confidence boosters, that's in room 4, which is sort of a little bit further up, nearer the toilets. And anybody who's looking at DIY systems and what you need to know about CGM and APS, that's in here. So if you'd like to get up and move right now, off you go.